Welcome back, everybody, to the second phase of our first rendition of the version one of the budget, second phase. Thank you. That's the handoff.
Okay. Everybody's had a chance to relax and clear your head of all the numbers, which can be a good thing. I may reach for food once in a while. I didn't quite get a chance to nab lunch while I was talking to a resident, so. This afternoon's session, if I'm correct on the next slide, should get us into some of the capital budget items. So I've got a few slides on specific projects with just some notes that everybody has to keep in mind moving forward. Time allowing, it would be good to be able to pop up the capital budget just in case anybody had specific project questions. Devin, I'll hand off to him at a certain point. He'll walk through some visual depictions of some of the projects that are in the capital budget. And if they're not, then I missed it. We'll have to add that in. Then I think we should circle back, like we mentioned just before the break, to just talk about council's feelings on taxes, or, you know, if you're all ready to say, use reserves for the election, which I'm picking the easy one. A few of those things that could be direction for the staff to work on for version 2. Does that make sense? I'll try not to sound like the teacher from Charlie Brown as I did earlier. I'll look at Barb periodically to make sure that I'm not doing that. So let's see what the next slide is. Okay, key highlights for the capital budget, version 1. The wastewater treatment plant, WWTP. Sometimes people see it as STP, sewer treatment plant. I think of it as sewer treatment plant. That's a large, important project in the capital budget. I highlight it because A, we want to remind ourselves that we have grant funding, 73%, and that it has a project deadline. And that's March 31st, 2025. That's the end of the next fiscal year. To my knowledge, and I've not been in the office for a month, I think we're still getting closer to tendering it out, but we haven't yet. So as that proceeds, the timeline for construction becomes shorter. So I see the CAO's light came on.
Yeah, and Alex may be back online, but we talked about this yesterday at management. The pre-design work took 12 months where we were expecting it to take 3, and we still have months worth of design work to do. So Alex has reached out to the funders to have some discussions around just that moving target of the completion date. So it's not for lack of trying to get through the process in time. It's just there's been some delays, and I don't know if Alex is online, but we're well aware of that March 31st deadline. We definitely don't want to jeopardize our funding, but we do need to work with those funders and just acknowledge the reality of where we're at. And Alex did say he's there, so maybe.
I do. Trying to see if his hands. No. Okay. I think the key is some of these slides right now, they're just accountability, transparency, and informing council. This is to keep an eye on. So to Aaron's point is it's being worked on, but something for you to keep an eye on is the March 31st deadline and following up on that. Actually, that I should mention that tied into the residents' question was around some grant funding, and does the town get grant funding? Because the reference was in it was either East or West Ants. They have it there, and I was like, well, we have significant dollars, and this would be one of the bigger examples. So that's got the deadline of the upcoming fiscal year. This next one's the next biggest grant that we have, similar sort of funding program, 73%. It relates to the active transportation, the network that's being developed. The deadline, this has a deadline, but it's not till March 31st, 2027. And Devin's actively been working on this to get to starting to lay out details of each section that can be worked on. And I'm not sure if that's in the slides right now or that'll be coming later. So
it's in my slides.
There's a slide for that coming up, so that works perfectly. But that's an important thing to keep an eye on, is getting that ball rolling, getting projects done, not only to just get them in the community so that the community can have the benefit of the network as it develops, but also to not hit another funding crunch. So keep that in mind. The new fire hall project. Oh, sorry.
Mike, so the 73%, that's what, like, and it would say it's $100,000 project, but we put it to tender and it comes in at 200,000. Is 73% of the 200,000 or 73% of the 100?
I believe that would become a bit of a negotiation or discussion with the grantor. We have had grant funding that exceeds the original budget. It would really depend on the details of why is it over budget, but there has been occasion where that's occurred. There's been occasions where their funding is
Yeah.
73% of the original. So the details would have to come out of the tender and then any discussions with.
Just thinking that the sewer, whatever you want to call it, it's going to be substantially more today than it was yesterday.
Yeah, the hope is that the number that was submitted was higher than the original cost estimates 2 years ago, I think. Now, whether that's enough of a buffer, we could talk about it here, but at the end of the day, it'll be what's the tender result and see where it's at. Is that fair?
Yeah.
Active transportation, new fire hall project. Not that we're losing sight of these things, but it's important to remind ourselves. That's scheduled for completion in 25-26. So that would be year 2. But in order for that to happen, other pieces have to fall in place. So that's another key one to the timeline's getting tight. I see the light coming on, so. we
Yeah,
have a
I
mini
can
update.
just say without getting into too much detail, because some of this is still being worked out with the mediator, but it looks like we will have a location finalized before the end of March of this fiscal year. That's the date that we're driving towards so that we can have a location and then we can start to proceed with design.
So that would fit nicely into the pocket of the timeline. There's some dollars for design in year 1, construction year 2, so that works. I think you all know what the next one might be. Town Hall Library project. Another major project, not in the year 1, year 2, but year 3. But year 3 is not that far out for a major project. So again, key things have to start. And for this one, in my view from where I sit, not necessarily those that work with, there's a lot to this. There's a lot of details. Devin's got to work on things, Alex. There's a fair bit of energy has to go into this, whether it's the building, the parking, the surrounding landscape, the intersection. So year 3 feels like that's a long ways off. It's not for a project like this. So again, I think being able to move forward on that becomes key.
This is, sorry. I just want to say to council that Alex and I have been talking to people and brought in a longtime employee of CBCL to talk about project delivery methods on larger projects like this, where we do have a number of projects forthcoming. An interesting stat that he shared with us, 90% of these types of projects are delivered over budget or not on time. So yeah, and we're trying to address that, and everyone that's been involved in large projects has different types of frustration and different sort of tensions that come up with those. But we'd like to bring a discussion to council about some of the thoughts that we have. We're working through those now, and mostly with a lens to the library. But as we got into it, I'm seeing a lot of applicability to the work we need to do on waterfront. So we'll bring that forward and have a good discussion about that, because I think it'll be very much of interest when we're spending this much money on these projects.
And to Devin's point that he just made, that kind of ties into one of the reasons I did the 2/3 in version 1 of the new money to capital, 1/3 to operating, was capital's got a lot of pressure on it. And to that point, the pressure is probably going to grow in dollars, even if the project's the same. So that's one of the reasons for that rationale, arbitrary as it was, but council will have a chance to revisit those things. Parks Master Plan. We had hoped that that would be informing the 10-year plan already. That was originally scheduled for completion in this fiscal year, be informing now. That's work still underway, so that will really inform next year's iteration as opposed to this year's iteration. It's almost like we coordinated this and we didn't. I get it, slide deck. So this is now the high level look at what does the funding scenarios look like? Remember, this is as exciting as the finance department gets in graphs currently. I believe both Jenny and the person coming in to replace me can probably do a better job at this, but I can. So this covers a number of years. It includes the past couple of years, just so you have audited results moving forward. So over here is 3.5 million when I start moving across. So we're fiscal years. We're coming into 24, 25, which is this year, out like a decade. Green, capital reserves. I think it's a shade of red. Might be my eyesight, is operating reserves. Keep an eye on the $2 million here. That'll relate to the operating reserves. As we know, we have a healthy amount of reserves, pushing $3.5 million of capital reserves, which sounds like a lot. But as we've looked at the CIP every year, we know we have major projects. The key, as we talked about in November, and it really hasn't changed much, we were either overdrawing in reserves or pushing the debt limit when we looked at it in November. By adding the $180,000 to fund, in addition to the 6% growth of that, right now, we don't quite overdraw the account in reserves. So the capital reserves tap out in a couple of years, but then start building back up, which they should. And just let me go to the next slide because I need to interchange these so it's less the specific than the trends. If I zoom in on this, that debt line was going over the benchmark 15% that the province kind of looks at us all to keep within. That 180,000 allowed me to kind of move back and forth between debt, reserves, and it's just a shade underneath that. So it's created enough room to at least alleviate some of the burden on debt. There's still a lot of iterations to walk through on that, but without it, you'd be pushing the debt line.
2 questions. Is there a requirement or even a rule of thumb about how much you need to keep in operating reserves? I see we have like $1.5 million.
There is
More
a
than-
benchmark. So the financial conditions index that the province issues says 20%.
Okay.
That's what you should have in reserves
Operating.
operating
Okay.
basically at all times. You could have other
Sure. And is that 20% or more?
20%, and that's the slide I have later with specific numbers, so we'll
Oh,
walk through that, but
okay.
it's about $2 million right now. I couldn't get into the last year's financial information return. I lost my link, so
Okay.
I would have had that specific update, but I'd like to confirm that there are good internal controls happening in both IT and finance. Because it was like, whoa, I'm still working on stuff. So suffice to say, it's around $2 million.
Okay.
Operating reserves, you can see are below that.
Right, okay.
As planned. So that's that issue. I think there's something to
Okay.
think about.
All right. My second question, I won't ask because I was going to say, could some operating reserves go into capital reserves, but you already answered.
We should say, what's 20% of? Because we keep saying 20%, but we never say 20% of what for anyone might be.
What's the definition? Our own controlled revenues, I think, is what it's defined as.
Yeah.
So you take your budget, you remove the amount that's collected for education, like you remove federal grants. There's different amounts in the formula.
So your revenue that we generate is 20%.
Kind of
20%
your
of that.
controlled
Right.
budget, so to speak, that's yours, would be kind of a common way to say it. Bigger formula than that, but.
Yeah.
So we have always included some use of operating reserves to help the capital fund. Tried to keep it towards the softer costs related to capital, like design work for a project, some of the smaller size projects that, an operating reserve fits. The reason we use it for things like design is if you end up designing a project and you've got this in the capital books, then you don't do the project. For whatever reason, not saying this council did that, but it can happen. And you've got this cost over there that used capital reserves for, but it's kind of not a legitimate use anymore, in my opinion, because it's not going to a capital asset. It just got spent and it's gone. So I try to use operating reserves for those sort of softer costs, just in case they don't pan out. The VIC would be one where we had several iterations of that project. We had several iterations of design. Those are not all carried forward as capital costs because the early ones have nothing to do with the building that will be built.
So Mike, what's happening out in 34? Like, why is that? Like, I can understand the curve up until 34.
This drop here and off,
Yeah,
I actually don't know off the top of my head. I noticed that last night when I was reviewing it, so I'd have to bounce back and have a boo. I must have been in a pinch, and out in the future year, I said capital reserves maybe didn't exist, and I changed something in year 10 assumptions that I haven't corrected, so it could be as simple as that. And I would almost bet money that that's what it is. Because early versions of this, as I'm working through this, there were no capital reserves. So I probably hit a point where the only way I could fund something was op. So that's a long-term assumption that doesn't bear immediate consequences to you, but yeah. The reason it's starting to build back up though, can be explained by debt capacity we find some wiggle room. And the gap between here and our funding, which grows, if not being used, accumulates in reserves. And in my opinion, I'm not sure all finance folks will say this, but the green build up use is what I think capital reserves should be doing. When towns and municipalities start managing to keep their indicators green, well, then you're just sitting money in a bank. So you've taken it early and you never use it. Well, for capital, that's not a good reason. Your operating reserves, it makes sense. $2 million sounds like a lot of money. That's the town's rainy day fund that everybody around the room should have in their own finances. It's if something happens. I've worked in a municipality when a major industry goes away. Having ample operating reserves was really important to manage over 4 or 5 years the loss of revenue. That's what it's there for, or that kind of unforeseen circumstance, major storm or, anything like that. For us, the formula says $2 million. The GFOA, the Government Finance Officers of North America years ago used to say it should be between 5 and 20%. The province has picked 20%. I think it's more specific to municipalities. There's a difference of a municipality with a diverse commercial economy and assessment base than a one industry town. One industry town probably needs a slightly bigger reserve because one thing can wipe you out. If you're more diverse, maybe it doesn't need to be that big. The indicator will still go yellow or red because that's what's measured. How you manage it though, I think is more important, and that's, ultimately what the province would do.
A question around how one industry town would be defined. Because I think of Acadia, but it's not a huge tax
Yeah,
pool for
we're-
us. So we would probably, I would think, be not under the one industry
Correct.
town, because we'd be diverse in our, is that correct?
And that's where I think the best practice relates to analyzing your particular town, as opposed to just an arbitrary 20%. It's my opinion, so take it for what it's worth. In Berwick, we had one main industry when I was there. They used to have multiple. And when that plant closed, that was significant. So, yeah. 20% is the measure that the province looks at to give you a green indicator. I would say don't panic if you hit yellow, just know your way back to the green. Fair? So that allocation of your new money allowed this to still be balanced over the next 10 years based on certain assumptions. The assumption I think that's probably still tight, and the reason to be at least cognizant is the interest rate assumption. I built it off the fall debenture issue, and they're like this. Be nice to have an interest rate. When we went to the UARB with the water rate study, the rate built in was 6%. We haven't hit that yet, but that allowed within the rate structure room. We're rate kind of at the number where it was at. On the upside, though, inflation has been dropping. There's guesses as to when rates may go down. Some say as early as spring, some say as might be next year. I haven't heard too much conversation that they'll go up. So as long as they don't take a jump on you, that funding model works over the 10 years. And then every little tick down creates a little bit of breathing space in your funding scenario. So fingers crossed, rates start to drop, say in the spring, and that'll create room into your next year's 10-year plan. Make sense? Any questions? Or am I Charlie Brown teacher again? Okay. What's that? There is no test at the end of this. Okay, what's next? Identification of options to keep CIP fully funded. Although it's there, as the note says, there's not much in the way of wiggle room. So to Devin's point earlier, large capital projects tend to come in over budget. So maybe we're balanced only because we haven't adjusted the library town hall up to what's a reasonable number. Maybe we haven't moved the fire hall. Maybe there's decisions council will have to face because of a ceiling of dollars. How big is the new town hall library? What are the amenities? How big is the fire? Like, those are all the details that come into this. Right now, I don't think there's a lot of room in that, and you see how it taps out really quickly on reserves. So complete review of cost estimates. Again, to the point made earlier, we need to look at that. The fleet section I'm highlighting because I know in the years 1, 2, and 3, I think we've got updated numbers on that. But those should be carried through for the whole 10 years of the fleet replacement, because otherwise we really haven't reflected how much we're going to use in reserves. So just to double check on that. Identify with council, what if any projects are missing? And that's part of today in your next meeting, Review the options to increase funding allowance for future implementation of the Parks Master Plan. I think that becomes key because I think intuitively, we all know when that work's done, the $200,000 or $300,000 a year we have in there as a allow for future projects isn't a big dollar in any one year. So if the master plan comes out and there's projects identified and there's a timeline, that timeline in dollars may run into the current funding model. So that's more as you get into next year's iteration, because we just don't have the dollars on that. But I think it's safe to say $200,000 to $300,000 a year is not a big parks project in this day and age. This one, and this will have to have some follow-up. Specific projects need to be identified for the one-time sustainable service growth funding grant we got at the end of the last fiscal year. That was a provincial grant, could have been used last year. We got it on, this is the one we got on March 31st last year. Well, the budget had already been set. Probably a lot of people's budgets were set. So we didn't have any projects tagged with that. So that 482,000 plus interest, so it earns a little bit of interest as it's sitting there, is available for capital projects. It requires a motion of council to identify those. I think that could be done as the budget process proceeds. I've tentatively got dollars in wastewater treatment plant to cover a little bit more and take some pressure off the debt. And then if it's over budget, the debt might have to go up. Reservoir Park, we had a little bundle of projects, and I think they are in the slideshow later. I haven't looked at the slides, so I'm continually going, I think they are. That they're smaller in nature and it would be a good use of capital funds, and it seems to fit the criteria they had, and it would alleviate pressure on reserves. So whether or not those are the approved ones, they're the ones that are built into the funding model right now. And that uses up that fund. But it would be good to get that settled so that those projects are okay and ready to roll early in the new year. Any questions on that grant funding one? It's an odd one. I mean, we received it at the end of the year. I don't know whether other people were surprised. I was surprised. I actually think there was emails back and forth of, does anybody know what the 400, the mayor was, any of us know? So
would that be like a discussion that we would have after this presentation, that where we would want to put that money?
Timing wise,
Or-
I have a discussion whether you're comfortable with what I've done with it in version 1. If you were comfortable with that, that may come back into, say, February committee of the whole, to have a motion to at least get those components approved so that that's tagged and you can send it off. Because we submitted a report in December saying we haven't used any of it. We don't have any projects identified yet. So if that could be done, whether it's February or March, I think it would be good to have that done. If you're not comfortable with where it's used, then further discussion. I equate it to gas tax. As a town, we get $350,000 a year in gas tax. Often heard it said, but we could use it for this project. We have so many dollars that we need to do. These dollars are already in the budget. If you use that reserve for something new, you still need money for these things because you know you're already moving forward with them. So I think you're just moving money around to get nowhere and unnecessarily complicating it. You need it now for the projects. I'll stop there in case there are any other comments.
Councilor
on
McKay?
Yeah, so now that I just heard you say that, these are already in the budget anyway, so we'd use them, but I was gonna ask, if we had other things, because there's still, I don't know, maybe $50,000 other dollars left there, maybe not. Sustainable, I don't know what the parameters of that grant are, because we didn't.
There-
Well, we didn't really apply for it, I guess, so I don't know what the parameters are, so I wouldn't even suggest anything. 'cause I don't know.
It fits in the generic bucket. It had housing in it. It had enough, and then when you filtered down to the detail, it was almost any project we're working on, not quite. I'm trying to be cognizant of stacking of grants. We may have grants that, the pathway through Clock Park may qualify for it. But we pretty much got full grant funding for that, so it doesn't make sense there. So I just tried to pick projects that didn't fit other funding that we need money for.
Oh, okay.
Isabel?
Just confirming this was a provincial grant.
Yes.
Yep.
Yep. One time. This is not where, to my knowledge, the town is not scheduled to get $482,000 in March.
But you never know.
Yeah, I
We
didn't know.
didn't know last
Didn't know the first time, so. And you may want to wait a month or so and see where you're at in the budget. That was just my particular pick.
Different level of government.
It's good to, it is like the gas tax though. Okay. I'd like to say the gas tax funding formula is changing. But I don't know what happened to our committee work. I sat
I'd
on
like
the
to say
committee
that
for-
too, but I don't think so.
I sat on the committee for a year and a half, a group of us reviewing the funding formula, and I think we did really good work, chaired by a good CAO and it changed the mechanism, but it reflected how the grant should work and related to capital projects, but I don't know what happened to it, so if that ever comes through, you'll be getting more money, but as it sits right now, you won't.
You retired, that's what happened to it.
No, I don't think so. If you want, we could cover quickly the water budget, just so you know, and then we can kind of jump back to the details of capital. There's a couple slides here, but a general discussion kind of as we wrap up, and then we'll jump over to Devin's slides. Water budget's fairly straightforward. It is a high-level projection style budget that I did. Alex and I have talked over the last year and a half of getting more detailed working papers. Going back to Kevin's time, we never had detailed working papers on it. It's much more trend analysis. It would be good to start getting it more project specific, but at the end of the day, you have to pump out a certain amount of water to the residents, treat the water. There's costs they have trends. And we're not going to make necessary decisions to change that. So I make the point that more staff time needed to review the expenditures. That would mostly involve Alex and his crews. Because I've made assumptions, I think they're relatively safe, but if there's specific things he needs to have a look at that. Even the cost of the treatment. We built in what was an unexpected change in trend to the rate study. We took that as a late item to the Utility and Review Board in August. But it's even grown a little bit from that, and I've only looked at that in the last week, so I don't quite understand that change in trend yet. So I don't know whether that carries into next year. It'll be part of the third quarter result going to audit. So some review on that is important. The revenues that are in there are based on the new rate structure. So you got 3 years worth of rate changes. You're about to finish the first year. So fiscal 24-25 is year 2, and then you have another rate change the following year. Then they're static until you do another rate application. I point that out because the results of the budget, if you had a chance to look at it, is we're really not gaining any level of surplus, or at least the level I'd like to see. You have room for a rate of return, and it's really almost a break-even sort of operation, and it requires use of the accumulated surplus and the depreciation reserve to keep the capital fund going. So based on a really early look at year-end projections and this budget, you should be looking at a rate study to be carried out sometime during 25-26, so year 2 of what we're going into, so that they're ready for the following year. That may change, but based on the information now. We've always said you should go every 3 to 5 years. So this timeline would be the early part of that, 3 years. I do think there's going to be a point at which we have a growth in customers that looks like this. As we all know, town's growing. That increases your base charge, so there's a moderate revenue increase from that. There's a lot of concern about the town, the demand on the water supply, and we've already had too much growth. You've had customers like this. The graph of consumption data, since 2007, we don't yet sell the same amount of liters of water today that we did in 2007.
Really?
Conservation.
And that's important to keep in mind, because although you still need to look for a third well and you still need to plan for growth, the growth that has occurred has not increased the water usage overall. The rationale for that is Acadia took huge steps, probably around the time I got here, because they've got a water bill that what's one of the ways they can improve their bottom line or funding, improve efficiency. You got a lot of old buildings. So they took, deep renovations to help that. You go back to 2007 through to about 2012, you can see that. And if you think of our housing stock, much of our housing stock is older housing stock. Not that some people are doing it intentionally to be, they're environmentally thinking, I need to cut down on water. Some people are just, I need a new bathroom. You replace the bathroom, new taps, your consumption goes down. So that change in consumption model has offset the growth in customers, which is really interesting. And that was vetted through the rate study as well.
That's a good question. Are we gonna go back to the list of those?
Projects?
Yeah, or is this where we ask a question?
Let me hit the next slide, because somewhere in
the
here, we
next
are gonna
slide.
go back.
Yeah.
Sorry?
No, I just asked if she meant general projects or water projects. So if it's a water project discussion, that might happen now if there's.
Sure.
Yeah, I will.
Okay. So my question is coming, because we had extensive discussions on our wells and then the lack of parts and when one couldn't come and that, like, whatever, all those discussions we had. So, so are we good? And do we because I still don't,
Do you want me to go to the water budget?
well, and just, I find these really hard. Next, this is totally admin related, but can we put lines across there? It's really hard to go all the way across, but I don't think new Pee-wee, I guess that means, well, we don't have it at all out in our year 5. So are we saying that we're not even projecting to need a new well, or?
Let me just pop up,
Is
so
that-
we're
yeah.
all looking at the same thing,
Sure.
if that's
While you
okay?
pop that up, I did flag this for Alex, so he is there, so he
Okay.
might want to contribute to this discussion.
Because it has it there, but then it doesn't look like there's a dollar amount at all out there. And just where we had I thought it was a discussion on a backup, wasn't it too? Like to have it just in case we
Yeah.
couldn't get that to go? Yeah.
No, okay, we're mixing a couple things together here.
Could
Okay,
potentially-
one is the pumping equipment
Yeah,
and the
Yep.
equipment needed keep the well functioning. That was the issue we hit earlier where reordering stuff got caught up in the supply chains and all that. To my knowledge, we have now got the redundant pump and equipment down at Public Works. That was the goal. Problem was waiting for the supply chain to catch up to that. The long-term goal of also so that's redundancy and equipment to keep the two existing wells going. The other issue is a third well that can add as a little bit of an extra redundancy, and this is where I'll probably hand off to Alex if he wants to jump in. But that's a redundancy and capacity building for future growth. Is he gonna jump in or do
Yeah,
we have
he
to
is.
elevate?
Yes, he is.
I was just struggling to figure out how to unmute my mic. Can you guys hear me?
We just can't see you.
Yeah, yeah. I understand you guys have the window minimized, so my camera's off. The wells, yes, the primary purpose of the third well was it was twofold. It was capacity building for future, and it was also adding redundancy, source redundancy to the system. This is something that was identified in our source water protection review, and it was also flagged in prior studies as well. So basically, you're putting another straw into that aquifer to decrease the likelihood that, similar to what we had there a couple of years ago when we experienced 2 pump failures at the same time, that we're not getting water from the aquifer to our reservoir. So that's the twofold purpose to the third well. We have completed the geotechnical portion of the well exploration program just in the last couple of weeks, and we're planning to get the first and likely only test well in the ground on the Elderkin property after the budget for 2024 is approved. This is one of our capital projects for 2024-25 is that test well and development part of the program.
Can you tell me where that is on the budget then? So it's not the red new PW3. So a new test well is obviously not that, but I just don't, maybe that's.
The last page of the budget document itself, actually, it's the whole PDF. Are you on the
Yeah, the very last one, 65. page 65.
production well number 3?
Yeah. So that is that one.
There's $115,000 in year 1. $80,000 in year 2 for equipment, and then SCADA integration at 20,000.
So that's 215,000. Okay. And then, well, because there's a red one up there that says new PW3 to what? And then it has nothing.
It's a working draft.
Okay.
Somebody's
Just-
gonna
I
hit
was-
that line.
Okay.
Yeah,
Just
and
using it.
just to comment on that, there are further costs to be attached to this program to connect the new well to our existing system. Those costs have yet to be developed because we don't know exactly where the well is going to be, how deep it's going to be. There's a lot of engineering that has to go into planning that transmission main connection, and we're also looking at we're looking at transmission main redundancy as well at the same time, and how that all fits in with our current replacement program. So that line has yet to be developed.
Apologies for the confusion, because I'm better as an employee than a contracted service. officer.
No.
Will affect the rate.
Can I ask a question to Alex? Just to be clear, we had the 2 pumps that went at the same time and we were waiting on parts. So presently, do we have those 2 replacement parts in? We have 2, not just 1, but
No.
2.
I think we have one, don't we,
One,
Alex?
one?
We
Okay.
have 1 complete spare pump and motor and 2 working pumps and motors in the ground in service.
So we wouldn't potentially be in the issue that we were before. Okay, thank you.
Exactly, yeah.
All good on the water? Okay. Thank you, Alex.
You're
I
welcome.
Gotta find out where I was. Du-du-du. all the way back to the beginning. Here, let's do this. So we were down in here. So that was the water budget. So we're fairly good on the water budget. Like I said, I do think Alex may have a look at it. There may be some changes to actual numbers. I'd like to see, if, not that you want to see consumption go up, but have we reached the point that efficiencies and savings have been maxed out by the community so that the growth in accounts will see a equivalent growth in sales? Because if that happens, your bottom line is going to start to improve. Because it is a revenue source, and even if it goes up some, it's still less than it was in 2007. The other thing is the treatment costs, depending on how that pans out and the work that Alex is doing in terms of the pH levels and the utility plant workers. That jumped from a budget of like 55,000 to like 140. I stand to be corrected on the exact number. If that normalizes again somewhere in there, those costs will go down. And then the final piece of it is we have currently what's called approximately 40% of the water that we put up to the treatment plant becomes unbilled revenue, is what the utility review board calls it. That could be annually you flush the hydrants. Well, that water doesn't get billed anywhere, so you lose water. You know, there are reasons for it. It typically isn't 40%, 20% is more of a general rule of thumb. Alex, they're actively looking at that. They have some ideas and we'll see whether it helps. So to the extent that that gets improved, if that improves 10%, good thing, 10% of your treatment costs, if it's linear, I think it'll be fairly close to linear, would drop. Because you wouldn't need as much because you're not putting as much water through the system. So there are some potential positive things that could happen with the utility beyond the numbers presented.
Could you repeat that the reference you made to the number of liters before and now? What was the amount?
I don't think I quoted the actual number
Okay,
of liters.
but
I
what was-
simply said that we actually put less water through our system
Right.
than we did in 2007.
2007.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. I wasn't sure it was 7 or 17 and 2007,
Yeah, it's remarkable.
that's 17 years ago.
I know.
But Acadia's done some work.
Right, but I mean, that's remarkable.
And the only reason we know well,
I think
I
we
can
should
tell you
brag about that.
2007 is I looked at it shortly after I got here. I wanted to start building a historic model, and that
Mhm.
was where I started, or I could get that information. And we've seen that trend.
That would be an interesting bit of information to kind of put up on Wolfville Blooms or something, to sort of, I don't know, it's an environmental sustainability.
Yeah, it is a piece of information. We could get the graphical representation of it that helps, yeah.
Yeah, people are practicing conservation. Alex did note that they have addressed a couple of suspected locations of loss later last year, and he expects the unbilled losses to drop in the coming year, just doesn't know by how much yet.
Those are the good trends. So if that happens, you may be able to delay the next rate study a year, sort of thing, that increase. So keep an eye on that in the next 2 to 3 years. Okay, does it make sense to go into these? Probably before we go to the detail into the slides. Operating reserves, I mentioned this earlier. I wanted to bring the actual dollars forward so we know where they're at beyond a graphical, because we are now kind of hitting our benchmark. So from your audited statements, everybody can go back to the March 31st, 2023 audited statements. The operating reserves were 2,195,000 and change. For the 23-24 budget year, the year we're currently getting closer to the end of, the town planned to use 155,000 of that in the operating budget. And that was for things like the boxcar, Devour grant, there was a few other things. And the CIP funding was 130,000. So there was, if all ends according to plan, $285,000 will come out of that as budgeted. That drops you down to 1.9 million. Where it didn't have direct access, I think our benchmark's probably gonna end up being around $2.1 million. That benchmark grows every year your budget grows. It's a percentage of your revenues. So at $2.1 million assumption, we're $190,000 short of the benchmark. I don't think it's enough to, you know, you don't have to change the world for this, but we're now dipping below the benchmark. So I want to highlight that. We also have some planned use. And so in the current year, we're not going to do the $55,000 or $50,000 to Devour, as far as I know, because it was tied to the patio back. So that's probably in next year. So that falls down into the next year. The reason I didn't lower this 155 is if we are having a deficit, maybe we don't need all the operating fund for the reasons you planned. Didn't do the boxcar, won't spend the 50,000 to Devour until the next fiscal year. Right now, and it'll be in the information report to audit next Friday, and it'll come to committee of the whole February. If it's $100,000 deficit, you're gonna have a recommendation that says approve 100,000. You're not using all 155 for that, but you need 100 for this reason. So this scenario is probably in the ballpark of where you're gonna end up. Planned use in the current CIP is another $143,000. So you're about $383,000 short of the benchmark. I only tell you that to be aware of it, it's not panic stations, it doesn't have to be solved tomorrow, but you're dipping below the benchmark. You want to have a plan to get back to what is considered a healthy level. And I think that's important. So just know, and that ties into all the other grant applications you have seen or will see in the coming months. So we don't have the Historical Society one recognized through the process yet. We know it's coming, but if there's 50,000 there and there's 50,000 for another and 20,000 somewhere else, that's 120,000. Typically that comes from reserves because they're one-offs. We've kind of reached that point where that bucket of money has been utilized and should stay at a certain level. So what was possible 3 years ago or 10 years ago is not necessarily possible this year. And we've said that every year we use reserves. What you have the ability to do today, I have enough rainy day funds at home that I've saved up. Somehow I can go get a car. I probably can't get a car again the next year and the next year and the next year. You know, your situation changes. So that's just highlighted to let you know, generally that's where I expect things to play out by March 31st. That's that, you know, how I always bring good news. That's that. Okay, that's not good news, but it's manageable. We always say it's manageable. So we're into that kind of recap, and I don't want to get there yet. I think, do you want to walk through the capital budget projects, or Devin, do you want to give the visuals that kind of tie into that? I'm open to either, because we didn't have a chance to rehearse this at all.
I think maybe doing the visuals might be helpful, and then if there's anything that doesn't come out of that, then to pop it up.
Get away from the numbers for a couple of
Yes.
minutes.
Can I make a comment? Can you throw that one back? Never mind, don't throw it back up. It's fine. 383,000. I think that's an important one again to look at when we look at whether we're holding tax rates, because we are $385,000 short of where
I'll
we
get it shared and I'll get
now.
it.
It's only a benchmark, so it's not like hard and
Hard
fast
numbers.
number, but yeah, it's not pennies. No, yeah, it's really interesting.
Sure, he gets the pictures.
Good afternoon. This will be far more visual than what you've just seen. I did choose some words here that, you know, you could use whatever you want here. I know that our budget and different line items have specific names and our departments have specific names, but, you know, I'm really talking through this about the projects that are in the budget that are in year one. So these aren't new projects. And these are really like the social infrastructure. And I think part of council's role to justify some of the tax rate and tax overall amounts and dollars out of people's pocket is like, I think this is part of your value proposition. Certainly as why people want to live in Wolfville, and from my perspective, is the quality of life. Why businesses want to come here is because of, you know, the interesting things that are going on. Hopefully this is helpful. I wasn't really the director of parks up until recently. So this is, I'm doing this because I really think it's important that you see the work and sort of see how we're going through these different things. So I just want to start with the bigger picture, with the parks master plan. This was a project that Kelton was carrying. I'm certainly now moving that forward, but with issues like homelessness and other things that we've dealt with recently with some of the staffing moves, I just want to give you sort of like a conceptualization of the big picture here, right? So we've done consultation, quite extensive. We still have some to go. I want to have a meeting with Olsen Park. There's some other stakeholders that really should be talked to about specific areas. So we want to take the time to do that. And as this has been going on, there has been work, both with the consultant and from staff, around looking at more of that planning and policy pieces. So there's mapping with that, there's research, there's best practices, there's jurisdictional stuff, there's demographic information that we've brought to council, that we've pulled per neighborhood. And so we're trying to work towards another milestone for council to grab onto. So we're, just so you know that we're still working on that, but sort of backing up to some of the experience that I know is reflected from comments here and from Mike. We really want the projects that we've committed to happen, right? So we don't want to just talk about them. So I've spent quite a bit of time working with staff, different staff, trying to make sure these are happening this summer. I think that's all that's on here. Yep. So just from a spatial distribution perspective, because I know this is part of what council faces when you're talking to people, is, where are the investments, or is the West End getting all the investment? Is downtown getting all the investment? So the projects that I'm going to talk about, this is their spatial distribution around town, right? And I think that's pretty fair. The yellow is more like a not as big project or an operational type thing, or maybe even a conversation. The red is, again, a bit of a different bucket. The green is things that I'm going to propose to you here that staff have been working on happening this summer. So we can go back to this. I won't go through all of them because I'm about to actually go through all of them right now. So I'm going to start with Reservoir Park. So as part of the parks plan, I did do a fairly significant consultation, and we had information on the website. We talked to a lot of different individual stakeholders, but we had a meeting at L'Arche, and these are some of the visuals that we showed at that meeting. And we did a similar one for Waterfront Park. And so for Reservoir, from my experience at the meeting, and just to sort of read back to you some of the things I heard, there's a lot of concern over tensions, and the middle of that circle diagram should really, that could also say tensions. And there's a lot of like user tension between dogs, people, swimming, and it's seasonal. And then there's change tension around the East End, and what people have been used to and what is either happening for real or what people foresee happening because of some of the change. So just trying to be really upfront that we do acknowledge the tension. And I think from my seat anyway, the tension is good in a lot of cases because it actually leads us to a better decision. So a lot of the projects that I'm about to show you aren't coming out of the consultation we just did. But I do think it confirms that we are going in the right direction, because there was other consultation through the accessibility committee around shade and different things like that. But I think there's a separate project at Reservoir that's more to do with the dog bylaw, because the dog bylaw defines where dogs can be off leash. And right now it shows the whole park. And a lot of the comments that I was getting were about dogs and about off leash and about mix with kids. And so that's kind of a different thing. It's a management piece and a bylaw discussion that we could technically bring anytime. So none of this is really new to anyone, I don't think. So the main three pieces that we've been talking about up there have been shade. And so trees, which don't provide immediate shade. We've talked about a bathroom and change facilities up there. Anyone that's been up there when it's busy knows that it's chaotic. The other idea that has really come out, and talking to the parks crew, this is a bit of a longer standing desire from people they talk to, and we've heard about this in the consultation, is something for people to swim to, a swim platform type of piece. So the change room is budgeted, the bathroom part and the change room has been budgeted, and the conversations that we've been having, we think that the budget is probably sufficient for that. There's different options out there. I mean, there's a lot of modular options that people are bringing forward. But really what I'm doing here is checking in, because we're about to turn the corner on doing the next level of detailed work. The shade, the tree planting is great, and there should be some trees in the grass area, but we've also been looking at some really durable and colorful umbrellas that people can sit under that offer immediate shade. So we've been looking at sourcing some of those, talking to Dave and the parks crew around how those can enliven the space a bit as well, with some color, but also provide, a functional space for people to sit under. And then the swimming piece is more, largely for kids. But this is something that you'd see in a lot of different public type swimming areas. And then the final piece, which I'll say more about as we go on, is just having a sober look at some of the wayfinding and signage there. There's been a lot done there around signage. There might not be that much to do in Reservoir, but this is the scope of, I just want to make sure that I don't have more. Well, let me stop there just to get people's thoughts on this. I saw some faces around the swim platforms.
Yeah, the swim platform does provide some problems for me, given the fact that you're going to have people that are there, like teenagers that are going to be there on their own, and you have, one person swimming out, the other person can't make it. You have no lifeguard there. I think the fluctuation in the water is an issue. I don't know what kind of tree roots are there, but I mean, when I can tell you the two rescues that I had were people trying to swim for the platform and they couldn't make it. So because it's not lifeguarded, because it's not lifeguarded, that is a really big concern of mine. And then you have, people sort of playing around there. There's some big safety concerns for that platform not being lifeguarded for me.
Right. Go ahead, Lee.
Okay. I see the platform more as a luxury item that is not something that we should have to pay for. You can make your own fun, whether on the beach, take your own toys. The safety thing, thank you for bringing it up. I didn't think of that, although that's should be number one. I just thought, why would I pay for a platform? It sort of takes away going up and just having a little swim, and it's not a public pool. It's just, so it should not have a lot of the luxuries of that. The change rooms, definitely. I mean, I don't go to Reservoir Park often, but I hear about it all the time, that those are just something that should be up there to provide a little safe space especially for families. Signage, definitely, especially if there's all these new things coming and going. It'll create a little bit of filter for those that want to go walking or swimming. The umbrellas, yeah, okay. I just see it as a really nice natural space, and the more little umbrella, there are trees. It's, take your own umbrella or take your own shade or that kind of thing. I don't know. I just feel like it's now just becoming too a lot of expense for us just to create these spaces when I think they're already there.
Councilor Madeira Boss, but I see.
Just before that thought on the umbrellas is lost, just part of that came from the accessibility committee, and shading in a way that is more accessible to people that cannot necessarily get to the tree area.
Okay. That's different. That wasn't explained up there, or, yeah, I'm 100% okay with that type of umbrella shading accessible. But if it's just for someone who's going up there to read a book and wants to sit under, you know, that's completely different.
I would agree with Councillor Ingham, Councillor Butler regarding the platform. I think the bathrooms and the change rooms are obviously priority as the signage. I'm a little bit less friendly to the idea of colorful umbrellas in a place where we really are trying to focus on a natural environment. I don't know, somehow that, I think shade, maybe there are other ways of providing shady areas that fit in a little more with this sort of more natural landscape. But it just looks a little bit too, I don't know, commercial or something about it that I,
Resort
but
like.
yeah, it's just a value.
This is, that's just a generic photo I pulled
Yeah,
off the
yeah.
internet. Yeah, yeah.
Deputy Mayor?
Interesting ideas. Really, the bathroom should be at the top of the list. I notice you have trees, shade over time in the grass area. But we really need some tree planting on the other side of the ponds where there are still trees there, but it looks like half of them have been blown over by the wind. That concerns me more.
So there's two different things there. One is really responding to this accessibility need. So that we're responding to shade in this scope. The sort of urban forest management, there's a whole section that I'll show you that is on the north of the ponds that really will need a planting program. And Peter's coming in to work with us this year on some of that. That will be in scope with him.
Great, thank you.
Councillor McKay?
Thank you. I totally agree on the bathrooms and the change rooms. Those are much needed for anyone who's up there. Sometimes you see individuals walking home sopping wet with towels wrapped around them, walking off Pleasant. I see that often. I like the idea of shade. I'm not saying it has to look like that either, but from an accessibility standpoint and from, I don't know if anyone remembers their early parenting days when you brought, you know, your child with floaties, towels, food, water, and shade. It became an awful lot. And you know, to do that, you literally have to drive up and unpack yourself and then go back. Where if you really couldn't bike there or do anything else walk there. So I like the idea of having shade for various reasons, accessibility and just for generic people to use. Yeah, I'm not sure about the platform per se, but as a person with a teenager, and they're always looking for something to do besides cause trouble. It would be nice, I don't know how far off you'd have to put, but inflatable things that you can put up, like they can climb on them, but they're really close to the, not really close, but close enough where it's not super deep. And we've seen those at various places and they're used at lakes and all those kinds of things, but I'm not sure if that can be put there or if it'd have to be monitored by us on some way, but yeah, finding things for kids to do that in that age group is often hard. So, and they do use this space quite a bit. So just a different perspective from someone who's still got a teenager.
Councillor Palmer?
Thank you. Just referring back to Councillor Ingham, like one who has been rescued at least once in their life, and I would be opposed to the floating platform out there because I know, speaking for experience, what teenagers are like. I was one not too long ago. But I would be opposed to that. I could just see nasty things happening there. Yeah, peer pressure, midnight, you know, like that would be, yeah, a lot of bad things could happen here. But let's get the trees planted this summer. Like we need if we're gonna do tree planting there, let's do it this summer because the time to plant a tree is yesterday.
I agree with comments on the floating dock. thinking back to when Jen Boyd was our recreation, I don't know if she was our recreation director, but I remember asking, if you remember, we used to have that building where the grass is now, if we shouldn't put a ring buoy or something that would let us, if somebody got in trouble, then it could be used as a, for safety. And her comment at the time, and I understand that had been checked with our lawyers and insurers, that in doing that, that says that the town realizes that we have a responsibility. And so at the time, things may have changed, that was good 10 years ago. Certainly putting a platform, which recognizably would be fun, also I think would give us some responsibility. So at the very least, we should check that with, I think at the time she was checking that with Royal Life, and you remember that, Mike?
Yeah, no, that falls, and that falls into a basket of any service. If we start testing the ice.
Yeah.
HRM's just gone through this.
No ice to
Start
test in
testing
HRM.
this, and you have a liability or responsibility to do it. So
Yeah.
those things are more complicated. They will-
Yes, looks like fun, but it could come back and bite us.
Okay, so I'm just gonna circle around some of these just so we can move them. So swim platforms, we're gonna take out of our sort of scope, and as we get costs together, the bathrooms and the shade, everyone's good with that stuff. And there's other smaller, the signage piece is really a minor thing, but as you'll see, it's a project that we're actually want to bring to you with a budget. So good on, actually, I have another slide on Reservoir just for bigger picture context here. So I showed this at planning committee. This is the East End development. I assume everyone knows that. This is a more advanced drawing. I wouldn't, like the buildings that are cited there really aren't the actual buildings. They're just placeholders to show what setbacks and different things could be. So what I want you to focus on and why I highlighted it is the green areas. So the green areas are public land, and there's even more public land that I didn't highlight as much. The whole bottom right of, this is all Reservoir Park here. And so this is played out as the secondary plan indicated. So all of this is as council approved, which is very positive. Some of the, the trails to get them to at the right spots, some of them have shifted a bit as we've conceptually drawn those in the early days. But I just wanted to show this in context of Reservoir. There is a commitment to have a viewing platform built on the north side of the North Pond, where that circle is, which would connect down into the space that we're going to be taking on. And so I'm working with the developer through like landscape plans, more detail, as we get to that point. This summer was really challenging, obviously, to work with the amount of water that we had. So they wanted to get a bit further and they didn't. So I'll provide some updates on what we can expect from a change perspective up there. But the area that I was indicating as far as a tree planting program, you can see, if you see that circle and you go to the right of that linear parcel, that really is over time a really nice buffer between the development and Reservoir Park that is being given to the town. Other pieces there, I mean, we've talked about when I brought the other pickleball report previously, we did talk about that space that you see with a square, with the orange square. So if people have been over there, that area is like settling out. There's been a lot of material brought into there, the culverts in. The road is mostly roughed in and services. So we'll see a lot more change there. And I think the more information I can bring you about what's coming and what we're going to see in the spring, I think that'll be helpful as we all kind of end up talking to people about this. So I'm going to talk about the West End now.
Me too.
I just wanted to, I'm glad to see the trail investment, only because as you talked about the dogs and, people complaining about the off-leash dogs, it's basically you're walking in a circle right now, or like around the two ponds. And a lot of people with dogs, they go around the side trails. So this would allow more space for people with dogs to be walking in, maybe a path and maybe not that concentration around the park. So I think that's that kind of an important factor. moving forward on that park, that we get those trails, you know, because they were taken away, we need to give them back. I think it's a really important piece as somebody that walks up there probably every day, the same with Mayor Donovan, and maybe Jody does too, but I just think the trails.
Renee does.
What Renee does? Okay. Well, but I just think that that opens up a much more space to maybe alleviate some of the issues that people were complaining about the dogs. We have more space, right? Rather than this, I think it's less than a kilometer. If you walk by the highway, it's maybe a little bit more than a kilometer, but then you go down the side trails, you're gonna have so much more opportunity. So I think that's an important piece.
Can I build off that? Sorry, you were first.
She was-
Go ahead.
Well, I'm not talking dogs.
Okay.
I think though, even like for people with dogs, it's the other people who don't have dogs. That is a really nice, I took my mom when she was here, and it's a really nice flat place to walk for people who just want to go and walk. You can make those circles. They are so nice and flat and accessible to people that is for, whether it's for everybody, that it's a nice space to not have, if dogs were not somewhere else, but more dispersed. Yeah.
Mhm. Just quickly, one pond or two ponds? In the development below the park?
One pond.
Just one, okay, I
Yeah.
get asked that.
Yeah, there's like a reclamation going on with that water course that was through there. I mean, a lot of that water course had been pseudo backfilled. It doesn't really take any water, really. And so the engineering design as that's built out has water actually going to that, and you will see water moving into that pond. It's just, it hasn't been finished. So I had an hour conversation after my meeting last night with someone about that topic as well. Yeah.
Thank you.
But to be clear, that's not gonna be a recreational pond. That's a holding, like, it'll be dry almost by times.
Yeah, so yes, there's different ways to engineer that, retention or detention, but one of the things we've done in the past is we've treated those like pieces of infrastructure that you'd almost have a chain link fence around. So we're with this project, we have required them to make that an amenity that you can walk around. So it's not fenced and it's not really an isolated piece of what is kind of antisocial to have a fenced pond in your
Kind of like
neighborhood.
Olson Pond, which nobody would go in, but you can walk around.
Yeah.
I do recall in the environmental study that was presented to us around this, there was a specific reference to frogs. Just so I have an expectation, the kids will be able to go to that pond and catch frogs or chase frogs. Just so you know, I will be looking out for frogs. I read that detail, it stayed with me for. I'll donate some.
Pond.
Need to buy the frogs.
Well, and we should give a shout out to the salamanders as well, because I had a number of conversations about salamanders through that project too, so. Yeah. So I'm talking about the West End now. You can't really see the word west. So we're shifting to the far other end of town. And I do think in terms of what part of our role is here is to sort of be setting up the conditions for people to invest in the town. I think that's really what our MPS does. It sets up expectations. And I think with these new areas, and certainly my focus anyway with this East End and doing that secondary plan was really to establish the open space, the expectations around trails, and so that when someone is coming in to invest, they know that there's a certain level of amenity and quality of life that comes with that. So we did something different in the West End, right? And so now we have the West End being built out. There's more momentum on the planning side. So they have development rights in the West End to do over 200 units on the highway side of the water course that goes through there. And you'll see things like a 4-unit building that has a foundation in the ground now. It's almost built, yeah. They're just starting that building really, but there's been some semis built. So there's more movement over there. The Viking has a 4-unit as well. Yeah. So anyway, the approach there was different in the way that it was more, I would call it more transactional in the development agreement that was used versus the secondary planning tool. So we're now sort of going back to the West End, and I think there's been a desire to show some investment in those public spaces. So we did consultation there as well. This is a drawing that a child did about what they would like to see in the park. Well, I actually coach him as well, so.
It's Naz and Rafi's.
Yeah.
Welcome to small towns.
And so there's a lot of aspirations, not just from children, but also from the adults that we've talked about. But I also think we should keep in mind that this neighborhood is evolving. And so I don't think we should think that we know what the end game for these open spaces are. And so that's part of the approach that we've taken here, is to do some initial investment to really show that it is a park. It's not really clear when you're going by there. I know Travis's boys have been playing there a lot, and they drag some nets over and we're just doing their thing. And we've been trying to manage the turf, the grass there. But yeah, I think it's time to do something. We've put some things together, so I won't read all of these things, but these were some of the ideas, obviously. Some of them are fairly obvious, and some of them I think are a little more aspirational.
The trails. Can I go back to the park for 1 second?
I'm gonna do another park slide here in a sec too.
Okay.
Yeah. I didn't use Nazim's drawing as the concept pointer.
You did.
We kind of did.
Ian, you had a question.
So to be clear, you want to do something on the West End this year?
Yeah, and I'll show what that is.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So there's two aspects to the West End. One is a trail and one is the park space. So I'll do the park space second. I just want to remind everyone, this is what was approved, okay, from a public infrastructure perspective. So the roads, the protected area along the water course. And then there was a lot of debate around where this park was going to go. And I think we got a much better location here on the corner. So I'm going to talk about this park, and just high level, we've started to look at putting this trail in. And the reason that I'm talking about this investment readiness idea is because there are going to be multi-unit buildings built up there. And I really think it's important to have this type of thing in before we're right below the building and putting a trail in. I think that creates unnecessarily, honestly, something that we have to deal with and a tension that can be avoided. So we've actually had some people go up, our staff have gone out, and we've located the trail, and we're getting a cost. And I think at the next iteration, we'll have a firm cost on what that's going to cost us to build out. We're not going to build that trail ourselves. And again, it may be something that we establish, and over time, the service level of the trail can improve as, you know, there's going to be more than 200 units up in that area. So the needs are going to change. I think that's really all about the trail. There is a pond at the very top by the highway. If you've seen it, it's a beautiful view from up there. It's probably one of the best views in town. So there is opportunity for these different things. There's also a trailhead that is a commitment in the development agreement that I think would probably come once we have a better idea of exactly where the road is. And you can see the trailhead up here. Yeah.
Can I ask a question? I love the trail. I love the connection with the trail. I've had questions about as it gets developed, you know, at the top there, have you been looking at it at your working group for active transportation? Any way you could get to Horton very safely and like walking there? I've had that question several times, or can I put that on your radar?
You get
Is that-
across the highway, you mean?
Oh, I guess that works with the municipality too, though, but.
There has been discussion on linking the Harvest Moon Trail to Horton and looking at trying to get that funded and get a concept and a plan together. I don't think the county ever went forward and sort of took that to the next stage.
But I think they're still very interested to see how they might partner with us, so.
Would that be something that you talk about like in your active transportation at all? Like bring it up at some point? I've had a lot of questions recently about that.
Yeah, I think what it needs right now is a functional design to show that it can be done and what the magnitude would be, and then take that and get the right people in the room to talk about how to actually then do it. That's sort of what I had communicated to Scott different times to move that forward. But yeah, I agree it's really needed and completely possible if the funding can be available.
The old new management is also interested in that because it would be good for them, and then it's just up to
Yeah.
Horton.
Yeah, even to go visit, it's, because it's not that far, really, at all. Yeah, really looking forward to this, because aside from the 200 that'll be built up there, some of us will probably use that more often than going the other way. And my second question would be though, so what is that trail? Do we know what that trail is going to be made out of? Is it going to be the AAA?
Some of the grades will be tough to transition, so it'll be probably a 4 or 5 foot crusher dust trail, similar to what you're walking at Reservoir.
Gotcha.
Yeah. Some sections will be slightly different. Some of it is basically open field right now, and so that'll be quite easy to build. And then this is a deceiving drawing, to be honest, because most of the eastern side of that site is wooded, and so you're coming right in the back of Dr. Hennessy's property there and stuff. So yeah.
It's a little pond up here. Yes. Already. Yeah.
Do you want me to keep going or want to look at this a bit more? We could, oh, whoops. You good?
We're good.
Okay. So this is just really conceptual on the West End Park. Again, I have that generic umbrella picture here. That's like a downtown urban plaza. So I wouldn't assume that that's where we're trying to go with these projects. We're just trying to illustrate a durable shade structure that can be used and is accessible and can meet the needs of a variety of people. That's really what we're trying to show there. And so underneath of this drawing, you can see all of these different things. And so some of those are actually not directly from Nazim's drawing, but some of them are similar, right? There's a court, there's some space for natural play, exercise equipment, there's a piece of art, there's some bocce courts. Those aren't things that we think should for sure happen. What we're trying to illustrate there is that this is quite a large area that over time you could program and have different investments in different areas. But in the short term, and this is working with a landscape architecture team. This isn't me drawing this out. And so it's defining some of the edges and defining an entry, and really the fact that this is a park. I think that's really important to show that this is happening. So I've been working with Dave and Nick, talking about defining some property boundaries with trees and providing some shade over time. Having some simple planting around a sign and an entry at the corner. Where am I here? Irrigation. So we're getting a price on doing some irrigation there, just so that over time we can do that. Having some power on site, having some basic play equipment, whether that's some nets or something that people can use and move around, some benches and a few tables, and see how people then use the space. And then we can bring back some future iterations as that neighborhood is built out. I think that's that one.
Councillor McKay?
Thanks. I actually had a call on the 28th or 29th of December on this, asking us if we were going to move this forward. And it was really around, I think this 5 or 6 new houses up on the turn. I don't know what the name of that street is, but I guess it's still Sterling that goes up around,
Yep.
are all literally have children that are like 3 and 4 years old or babies, and are
Nice.
really, really, really looking forward and want somewhere to go with their kids and play. So while I love natural spaces and that too, I think there needs to be something. Nets will fit that, you know, the NASM's age group, I guess, where we had them on there, but there's also gonna be a ton of little kids coming through there in the next little bit. And that's just what's there now. Who knows what's coming when they all get built up. So I said I would bring it forward, that was a real big concern for that new group that came in. That they really were looking forward to having something soon that they could come and have.
Are
some
you,
play structure.
are you, you're, okay, you're referring to a play structure?
Yeah. Of some kind, like maybe it's a natural pleasure, but something that, you know, even a slide or swings for littles. And we don't actually have very many of those anywhere in town, like the ones where you put like the little, I don't know what those are called. You know, that you sit in and have the bar. I don't even,
Willow Park, right? We have some.
Like a little.
yeah, it's like the bucket seat. Yeah, Willow Park.
Have a will.
And that might be literally the only place in town.
What did you
Not
say?
at school.
There's none at the school.
This
Beg
is
your
like a
pardon?
swing set.
Yeah,
with
you
like
know
a-
where you have the little buckets?
The bucket seat and the legs go through and hold the
But I
bar.
think
and
they're
you
actually
push and they
bigger
hold the
bucket
bar.
seats there.
I still love those.
Do they? If I'd fit in one, I'd still go in it, but yeah, like things like that for littles. There's really nothing for little kids anywhere
Little.
around town. Littles.
So I like that.
Maybe toddler equipment. Is it a lot younger than toddler? I don't know.
Well, probably toddler. Yeah, littles.
Is that generally other people's thought as well? I'm just trying to get my head around we can bring something back that, this isn't a huge budget that we're working with.
No.
So,
I was just gonna say that there used to be some play equipment beside the children's center on Earnscliff, which was town equipment. I don't know, it might still be around, Nick, but it was too big for the preschoolers. And as I recall, the center asked for it to be removed because of safety concerns. And nothing was ever put back there for public use. So it would be really good to have some swings or something on the west end.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if I spoke to the same people or not that Councillor McKay was talking about, but that was a request I've got from two different people at work that someplace for toddlers to play and get them off the street and get I think this one woman was talking about 10 and under was her bogey that she was talking about because they're playing on the streets and that's just wrong.
Councillor Ingham.
I do agree that we need some more for the tinier children and those swings. We used to have some at Rotary, and then we used to have some by the Wolfville Children's Center. They used to be there. But I want to just be cognizant that these kids are going to grow in a couple of years. They won't need them. So I wouldn't want to just put something in for that age group. And I mean, if I look up at Rotary right now, I don't know what that structure is called, Nick. It's got a pirate thing at the top. It may not be that accessible for the younger kids. So something like that, where you can kind of walk up a ramp or something like that, which may be more inclusive to everybody. If you want to keep in mind when you're building this, the accessibility part too, that we really need to have, right? And also just to keep in mind that there is a large, age demographic there. So I wouldn't want to just focus on that, but I do believe, a couple of swings may solve the problem, and also being able to get up on some of those structures by walking or a ramp or something, and then having whatever that padding is at the bottom too. So just to keep it in mind, not to make it too big, but just to keep in mind that area. And then people that, are going to be coming into that area knowing that there's something there for them. So.
Councillor Butler.
At the Windsor waterfront, there is outdoor, like accessible, they call it gym equipment, but it's just very basic bars, and they have plaques that have specific exercises you can do on those. And they range in age. They have like, if you're this size, this is how you would use it. If you're a senior, this is there a way to get a cost of a couple of pieces of that? Just so, because of the age demographic in that area, I know some seniors that would love to go to the park and have something to do besides sit and read and watch the toddlers, like give them something, a little exercise space or something.
we could bring a few things back, and it will obviously have a budget impact. But we can bring a few things back, and then we can make some decisions. I think the basic laydown is really needed. And then some of this other stuff, whether it's this year or we budget for it in a future year, this is great to hear all the ideas.
Councillor Madeira Voss?
I'm just wondering if there are any service clubs that could be engaged in helping to fund some of this. I mean, I know that might be extra work on staff's part, but you know, whether Rotary, Lions, because some of those organizations may be interested with naming rights, donating or at least cost sharing some of this equipment.
It's funny you say that because I have had a group approach me about a different park. And I was bringing that into the parks plan and talking about partnerships and how that works over time, because there has been a history of that in the town. So sort of modernizing that is a great idea. Are we good on this one? Yeah, okay. So this is these are two really accessibility initiatives. So on the left, it's Clock Park essentially as it is, as you know it today, with the focus being concrete accessible walk with the circle being enlarged a bit and a compass feature being put there. This isn't really a big change in my mind. This is sort of the next iteration of investment there. And I think this was a desire of accessibility plan.
It was
Yeah.
specific input, so.
And then I'll just maybe finish this one. So on the right, just to orient you, this is the post office building. And these are some pathways just moving people around the Colville exhibit, coming off of the concrete work that we did not so long ago. Just because I had this one and we had been thinking about it, there are also paths around Mona Parsons that would probably benefit from that, but we would want to get a better idea on unit costing to see if that is a thing that we would want to do, or whether the first iteration of the Colville paths is a crushed path. Our parks crews don't love crushed paths. They're really difficult, so they are applauding concrete going in. But I'll leave it there for commentary on this one.
Councillor Ingham?
Do we have any, like, very many picnic tables around there? Because I can see now that that's sort of more of a gathering place. I
One
mean,
big one.
there's one big one, but I mean,
Which
just
one?
it's
Which one are?
the post office. Yeah, it just seems to me where we have the Alex Colville, Mona Parsons, and you're doing, these accessible walkways, that we could have some more picnic tables possibly around there with maybe some shade, where downtown people might want to go eat lunch there instead of down on the waterfront. This is a little bit easier than we're developing the waterfront, which may take a little bit more time.
Yeah, great idea.
Deputy Mayor?
Since I can throw it in here, Devin, I really hope that lighting specific won't be added to the area around the Colville wall. I think it's a safety thing to not have lights there.
We didn't have a concept to put lighting on it. I also think there's people living essentially right next
Right
to
there.
those pieces. So there's a fine balance there, and it's a private building that they're on. So if there ever is an idea to do that, I think we'd want to have a good discussion about that first.
Good, right?
Priorities.
And it's great that Clock Park is gonna be more accessible, if that's where we're gonna continue to host Santa. And all of the other things that we have right there, that's it, but I think that's awesome.
Deputy Mayor, did you have a comment?
Oh, sorry, I should.
This is just a reminder that we're going to retender the tennis court. Not really a whole lot. So we didn't do that. Previously, Nick's been talking with the tennis club about doing that. Right here is in the budget. So
How long are they displaced for when we do that? I can't remember. We did it 4, 5, 6 years ago. I can't remember now, but. So do we do it early? What's the timing of that? Does it go early spring so that's not as intrusive in their competitive schedule? I'm assuming they have a competitive schedule. It's early spring. It can be resurfaced. Okay, because it's just a surface, not necessarily pavement, isn't it? I don't know what it is. A coating? I don't know. Okay. Thanks.
Councillor Palmer?
But it's like a rubber, it's the same surface, you're just recoating with what it's got now, correct? When's that tender going out? The new tender?
As soon as we know.
Well, no, well, it was already approved last year. It's in last year's budget.
Yeah, it has to carry over, but if there's a general, consensus, this will carry over, we could tender it sooner rather than later. We already have the tender ready, just we didn't get any bids.
Yeah, I think the earlier you get it out, the better your chances are at getting somebody to respond, because you get zero response. It was over. We just didn't get any response. Am I right in that?
And I should have said this at the beginning. Really, what the reason that I'm doing this is to Ian's point, like we would really like to get these out as soon as possible. This one's ready.
Yeah.
So we could get it out soon. Some of the other ones as well. I had a meeting last night about the active transportation projects for the same reason, to get this year's projects out so we can get competitive pricing.
I don't know what it would take to get this out like this afternoon, but I would be all in favor of getting that out now.
I think Nick and the tennis club just have a couple small tweaks to it, and then looking at you, it shouldn't be huge changes to be able to get that out fairly expeditiously. Okay. So if everyone's in agreement, then that's, we'll proceed with getting that tender out.
I think it's one we need to get done.
I was just gonna ask the question and say in my mind, there were a few things here. So the tennis courts, the accessibility to Clock Park, what else was it carried forward? Reservoir were 3 distinct carryovers from last year. Am I right? If I remember things went down. I'm of the same opinion. Like last year, we said, let's get these things done. They were high on the list. If we want them done, let's go. And do we need agreement, or do we want a motion to put forward to move those?
Why don't at the end of this discussion, we get a motion that would then go to council, but a motion that any of the carry forward ones that you want to see, just list them in the motion and move forward with the tendering process so that we have that.
Can we talk about agreement on what ones we would want then before one would make a motion? Or do we want to do that later?
Yeah, there's just still a few more slides, so
Oh,
maybe
sorry.
at the end, just make the list of everything that you want to include in the. There might be more coming.
Okay. So what's this? This is other things, just to put it on people's radar. So Devour has actually found a major contributor towards this public space, this deck.
Too late.
I've been talking about it. Well, I mean, it's a very complicated piece of work. We have a force main there. It needs to be talked about because it's subject to some agreements that need to come to council. So I'm working with a couple of agreements, both on the rail line that we don't own. That's where this project's going. It's not on land that Devour owns. We have a lease to the trail. We also have a major piece of infrastructure under it. And so some of this diligence is really important before we go and spend tens of thousands of dollars on a piece of. So I think like it really needs to be talked about. The other side of it is we are going to move forward with some design work in Waterfront Park. I had a meeting with Danica Van Proust, who is someone who is really focused on living shorelines. She runs an institute at St. Mary's. So I met with her about bringing a bit of a project team together with CBCL, our Parks Plan folks, and take some time. We've been talking about doing design work on that project, I think, for 2 years. Easy. So I think we're ready to do that now. Department of Agriculture has moved their work along as well, which we've always been trying to tie into. Part of the reason that we did some geotechnical work there was because we were matching up with some of the consulting work that they were doing. But the reality is what they're dealing with out along the shoreline is completely different than what we're dealing with. Like it's apples and oranges. So we need to take the time to do this properly. And that's why I'm pulling people in like Danica, who are experts in shoreline, natural shoreline, long-term stability of these things. And we've had in this area, this region, we've had some not great applications of dealing with our shorelines. So I'd like to avoid that here. So as part of that work, the fence at Reservoir's on my mind, at Waterfront, has been something that we've been talking about with the parks crew for a while, and Dave feels that over the summer season, that would be something we could work on. What else is there? Just a reminder about, sorry?
It's by the trail.
It was really for the train. It was a protection between the
By the
active
bushes,
rail.
It's kind of in the bushes.
Yeah, it runs, you can see it here. It runs along the entire, it runs for basically this entire length.
Yeah.
And there's,
Bush.
we've put a couple of openings in it.
Yes.
And that was really to help with the flow of Devour when they have such a big laydown out there. So that I want to make sure that everyone knows about the change. Even these small changes are, they cause different levels of anxiety. So there's been talk of the hammocks, and I think that is probably coming back. I wasn't there
So
for
there
that.
wasn't clear direction that it come back. Those are temporary and can be moved, but it would be good to get direction. If council wanted that to come back for further discussion, I think clear direction would be important. Otherwise, I think the WBDC is just intending to proceed with moving forward on that project. So.
I would keep in mind that anything in Waterfront Park, like we're in a 3 to 5 year window, there's substantial change coming to Waterfront Park, right? And the whole site has to come up by a meter. That's the minimum that we've been recommended by CBCL. That was also recommended a few years ago. So there's constantly new information coming in on climate change, on sea level rise, on risk management around these types of things. So that's why we've been talking with the WBDC about these being movable.
But my only concern about not discussing the hammocks, I understand that they're movable, is just maybe we've kind of learned a bit of a lesson. I think if we had had some discussion that we could point to in a council meeting that wasn't just at a presentation, we might not have had as much pushback as we had. So is it possible just, the next council or committee of the whole meeting, just to say, this is what's happening and they are movable, and some of your comments? Not, for me, that is not an issue of approval. For me, it's really that I want to be listening to the community who said, we didn't know. When did this get discussed?
So I can bring some sort of images back and just like a bit of a scope, and I could run through some of it, and we can, with a motion probably, or
Yeah,
with
the
a motion.
will be good.
What
But
else?
Devin, so they wouldn't be going up until like the spring anyway, right? And then
Yeah,
they would have the capability of staying up there all year with the material, or would they come down?
I believe the material is all year round. Yeah.
I believe it's similar to what exists in Halifax,
Mhm.
and that is all year round. I think they're just imitating, copying what's there. So I mean, I just don't understand that this would be an issue at all, but I
think it's.
I think anyway, it's just an opportunity to communicate. I agree. Just communicate, not. To acknowledge
in December.
next December.
This December. So Deb, I guess then the question then I would like to know to bring back to the WBDC would be this. So if this is happening, I'm gonna put like a Devour, Devour's always trying to put a deck on the back of there. We're giving money to it. So that's gonna happen. If it moves out and we need to move the trail, do we just, can we, if I went to the WBDC and said, where do you plan on putting them? I assume that would be a discussion with your team. and just come back and say, yes, this is what we're planning on doing, this is what they're gonna be, in this location, but they are movable for now, because.
Yeah, we've talked about putting
Give
them
them
all.
some direction or something.
would be really good.
Pardon me?
A report would be really good.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, what kind of report? Yeah, so you just want to know where they are and that they're movable.
What's the plan? Yeah.
And maybe when they're being placed.
Well, be spring before they can dig a
That's what I'm
hole.
saying.
Yeah.
No.
Unless, well, no, but
My
I
only
think it-
question was surrounding a motion for that because it's already happening. So I don't know what we would actually move on, just that we received the information and how it's communicated, like is that, I guess it was more clarification on that because I remember clearly having the discussion about the umbrellas and clearly approving it, but there was hammocks, but there was no, oh God, the umbrellas, sorry, I do not approve the umbrellas. There was, but we can have another, like a information session, like this is the look and this is where they're going and the placement, but they're already on the way. So it's not something to carry through as a motion. I don't know why that would be, it's just an information thing, correct?
Just some of the discussion, if you felt that you needed to have a motion, and that would be council's decision, I think the motion would be to permit the hammocks to go in the public space, which would be waterfront park. Like that would be the full extent of the motion. And that's if council feels that they need a motion, that's what I think would be the suitable one in that case. Is that was some of the discussion around, what is the process for allowing an installation to go on public land without, council's kind of the formality behind it. So that would be, I think, the full extent of what you want to see in that motion, if you felt one was warranted.
Counselor Palmer.
I know, well, not to correct anybody, but I know that I'm not sure that this is a spring project. I think that it's soon. Like they want to do that in the frost while they can get on that ground and not make a mess. I think, isn't that their thought?
to the best of my knowledge, that they've been sourced, they've been ordered, but they were gonna take some time to get here. So I didn't, to my knowledge, it wasn't happening, at least not this. What was this, January? So maybe in the next couple of months, but not. It's not.
But we're not
tomorrow.
talking, and we're not talking about July though either.
Oh, no, definitely not July,
Yeah, so I think the plan.
like
well,
maybe March.
But
I guess it's January now, which the last meeting we had was November, so I guess it's coming closer than I feel.
I'm just thinking as a what I know about construction and what that site down there is like, you'd want to try and do that. Like next week would be better than April.
We have a meeting the first of February, the second week of February, where our council's the first one, our WBDC is the next one, so I wouldn't have it for Cal, but
We might
if
be
it was happening
changing- we
before
might be
that.
Changing Cal State.
Oh, yeah,
Don't
okay,
have that,
so
so it's
maybe,
possible.
so I can certainly ask and see.
No, good. Deputy Mayor.
Thank you. I just concur with what our CAO has just said. If we learned any lesson with the sign installation, it's that process is important on a public space. Okay.
I don't disagree, but let's be clear, we're gonna be doing it for everything that's on public space. Asana, anything we've got for public at all, we'll have to come back here for a motion. Just so that we're clear and fair for everybody, that I'm not saying we shouldn't, I'm just saying let's be cognizant that to be fair to all, if we do that.
I think we're talking about, yes, if there's a semi-permanent sauna, but if it's only gonna be there for a week, it would be like a devour tent. We don't approve that.
I think it's unfair to say there wasn't a process. It may not have been a clear process and it was a one-off process, but there was a process. We did have 3 presentations. We did have a public meeting. There was a process for people to get that information. And I think we need to maybe tighten it or make it clear or whatever, but I don't think it's accurate to say that there was no process. And you may not have known about it, but these meetings are public, the recordings are there. We had at least 3 presentations. We had a public meeting. It was not nothing was done that wasn't in a public, transparent way. And I think that's what concerns me. When people make comments like there was no process, it insinuates to me that it wasn't transparent, and it was transparent. And so the reason I guess we would formally indicate a process is to just make it clear to people what that process is in case they don't understand. But I think we should also be very clear that there was a public process and that it was fully transparent.
Director Lake?
If I may, I just would say one other thing about that. So I was part of the initial public art process that was set up and the fund that we set aside, and some of the good work around that and the formal group that we had, and moving to a different format that played out for the Colville. And I think what that says to me and the reaction that we got is, for public art, we probably should have a conversation about what that looks like moving forward. I don't agree myself with that being adjacent to seating in public spaces. Right? I don't think those are the same thing.
Seating?
Seating or hammocks, a place to sit down. Our
Yes,
parks
I
crew
agree.
needs the authority to be able to put seats out, and we're moving picnic tables around every year. And I really, I don't think we would have the ability to bring all these types of decisions to council. I think that would be very difficult. So I just think those are to me, those are two very different things. And I think the public art piece, we're light years ahead of most places with our appreciation of public art and what we've done in the last few years. I just think it needs to be fine-tuned, and we have a discussion about that. We have that in our working papers around bringing a project charter and doing a piece of work on that, if that is any consolation around. I know this was difficult, but I don't think those two things are the same. So are we?
Yeah, so just for clarity, so given that discussion, do you require that something else comes back on the hammocks before they proceed, or is it, can we take this that they can proceed? I just want to be clear.
I mean, I'm fine with them proceeding. The only thing that I would like to know is when they're going to be installed. So the public has some, to say, okay, they're up in 2 weeks instead of, just the same day, just the awareness of it, right? If we're going to do a change, just for the public to be aware, but I don't, that's my opinion. I don't need a motion for that or anything.
Okay.
Councillor Palmer?
I would just want to be kind of clear here that there's kind of 2 stages of the hammocks. Like, there's the installation of the framing, and then there's stringing of the hammocks, and those are essentially 2 unrelated things to get the hammocks up and running. So it's gonna take some construction to put the frames in, or whatever the things that they're gonna hang on, whatever they're called. That's not as simple as going down with a couple of 2x4s and a hammer.
So can you do the pre-work first, and before you have the hammocks, or I don't know?
I think the best bet
Yeah.
is maybe Jody can report back through committee reports, and we can have another discussion about how the work's going to play out. Because I personally don't know right now, but we'll get the information. I'm just more good or bad news, depending on your perspective on things. So we brought a report on pickleball, and right now in the budget, we have $300,000 that's sitting there as a placeholder. I think you saw through the different concepts that we brought forward, both for this site and the other site, that $300,000 is potentially light. I know Nick's been having discussions with people on kind of throwing a bit of caution to really take your time around this, because the sport is evolving, different demographics are playing, size and scope, sound. We've had a bunch of different pieces that, from my perspective, I don't think we're ready to invest significantly in a pickleball facility this summer. I'm not saying that we shouldn't do that at some point. All those projects that I showed you, plus the visitor center, plus the sewer treatment plant, I haven't shown you the AT work, there's wayfinding work. I just think I don't think we could promise this and actually deliver it from what I see. The other piece here is Acadia is going through this transition with Aaron moving over there. And I think there's a lot more to come around. We haven't seen the results of the Scion report. That area is the focus of their next, it's called the East Campus, where they do have a concept of buildings all around the tower. Even a podium on the tower has been shown at different times. And when we're talking about little things like the investment in the West End Park, some of the ideas that we had here, I do think we could stay generally around the areas that we're talking about for this type of investment and look at doing something more thoughtful for pickleball down the road is kind of where Nick and I have been thinking about this. And hopefully things with Acadia can change a bit. We could have more certainty around what they're planning up there. And we would certainly work with the pickleball community around what we had on offer this year and trying to improve that as much as we can. But we've looked at this court. Alex had someone go up and look at it, and it was in the $80,000 to $100,000 range. The fence, there's all kinds of things that are kind of knock on that once you get machines and things up there working, it's tough just to go in and, you know, fix one little spot. If we can do that, we will, if there's operational things that we can do to improve the pickleball experience, but this bigger investment, we're not seeing how we can do that this construction season.
Councillor Palmer?
As much as I hate to say it, but I think you're 100% right, Devin. Like, we're not ready to do it yet. And I know we have talked about a commitment to the pickleball players, and I'm all for building one, but the where is still the question. I'm 100% sure that Kroll next to Kroll is not the right place, because I know we plowed under within the next 10 years. I feel pretty positive in saying that. So I think you're 100% right. As much as I don't want to tell the pickleball players that.
Councillor Ingham?
Okay, so just to be clear, I think the direction that we gave staff was to look at how much it would cost to have it fixed for temporary. So you're having 2025. So you're saying the $80,000 to $100,000 is like the temporary fix to keep them going this summer? So that's, no.
So
Yeah,
That's what, I just wanted to be clear on that because we were
fix
so-
the surface and the fence.
yeah, we can continue on, provided that Acadia will extend that opportunity to the town status quo. That $80,000 to $100,000 was to resurface, because we know that one of the quadrants is not really playable to the extent the others are. It was some fencing. Alex just stepped away, but Nick might be able to fill in some gaps, but
seems
that's
like
to
a lot.
improve it, so it takes it to that next level.
But it could only
of
possibly
quality.
be till 2025. Like as you do, like how long, like, I mean, I guess it depends on Acadia and when their investments are going in around there. But to spend $80,000 or $100,000 for a year, I'm surprised that it's costing that much to fix up the courts, that's all, but.
So I know about the scope. I mean, it's going up there and fixing the surface. We could look at little patch job. And, you know, our crews could go up there and maybe try to do something really low cost. What we had looked at as part of our paving tender was someone going up there and actually fixing the whole court. There's some issues under it as well. That's why we're seeing issues. And then if you need to get in there and do that with heavy equipment, the fence already has issues. And so you're also looking at a fence and whatever other needs Acadia has. When we took this and talked to Acadia before, part of their ask was that we also do some other things there. So we haven't pitched that to them. That might not be palatable because they wanted some other parking spots created, some curb put in. There was a whole package of improvements that Kelton had brought. So we could look at something much more lower cost, but what we looked at was fixing the court properly.
So we had this was a temporary court it's only been here for one season, right? So was there that much wear and tear from last year or 2 seasons?
So it was in really poor shape before we used it as our temporary. So it was their former I guess still current tennis courts, but just in very I don't say deplorable, but it's been worn.
It's
So
been
we used it as a temporary space for last year, but we certainly didn't go into it in good shape. So I wouldn't say we've worn it out much more than it already was.
So it wasn't in good shape to start off with.
It was
And
not.
now, yeah, we don't want to have any injuries or anything moving forward on this, so.
So council's direction was, could we fix up that space a little bit better than what
Exactly.
it is now temporarily while we take some time to figure out where the long-term location is going to be and we make the bigger capital investment? Because right now in year one, we show $300,000, but until we really know the size and scope and where, we don't really have an idea of what that dollar value will be. So this is, we're coming back to say, when Alex looked at it, it's probably between $80,000 to $100,000
Okay.
to take to that next level. So it's a decision point for council.
Councillor McKay?
Really hate making promises that I don't keep. It's a real integrity thing for me, but, I understand that they weren't done and here we are. I don't know that it's not the best place for it, but if we don't think there's an East End isn't great, this is, if this. And people seem to really enjoy it there this summer, I will say. I got lots of pictures of people playing and they said it was great aside from that one court that was quite dangerous. I guess at this exact moment, do we have to make a decision? Or can we wait and see what the long-term by long-term? Can we get it for 5 years or 10 years until we decide or whatever that, and maybe we'll decide sooner than that. But if $80,000 or $100,000 got us the next 5 years of, something, and we had a plan in place, and I think the pickleball community would be okay to say, here's our next plan for the next 4 or 5 years. It's this, you can have access at the school, because they had space there where they used to put up their own nets. If there was a concrete plan that every year they didn't have to come back to us and say, where are we gonna play this year? Because that's annoying. Can we confirm that and solidify that over, maybe it's not even 5 years, maybe it's the next 2 years, and say that's what it's gonna be. Because for them, it is the unknown. They never, every year they come back and say, are we gonna have access? Are we gonna have access? What are we gonna have? And then they end up traveling to Hansport and all these other places to play because we don't provide anything. So what are our options?
Mike, did you want to respond to that?
Hopefully to help a bit. Just listening to the conversation, I wanted to clarify, at least from my understanding, and I'll stand to be corrected. I heard a comment that, $80,000 to $100,000, but it has to be gone in 2025. I think those are two different bullets. The cost estimate is as requested by council, is what would it take to better improve the surface from just going status quo. So to get a better surface, that is the ballpark figure. If you compare it to the tennis court, yes, it does cost that sort of dollars to do that sort of work. So you can know that that's reasonably in the pocket. That number, relates to that. Does it have to be gone in 2025? Now, I stand to be corrected on this. But I know that there's future plans there, but I think this was part of the discussion the last time this came up. That was from a master plan that was quite old. I think it's important to find out the details of when will Graham be broken for something by Acadia. So I don't think you need to make a decision today. I think you might want to consider, is $80,000 to $100,000 good investment for a short term? Not 10, 20 years likely, because that seems out of the ballpark. But if it bought you 5, is that reasonable?
The only thing
Yeah.
I would just make sure that everybody's clear that that is just the surface. So it would still be temporary nets. We'd just be fixing the surface.
Councillor Palmer.
But as, if we wanted to play there this summer, we wouldn't have to spend very much money. Am I correct in saying that?
Hardly any. The lines have been painted and we have the temporary nets already.
And we have 3 courts, not 4. I mean, there's 4, but the one is unplayable pretty much because it's quite dippy.
Were you going to say something? Jim?
No, I was gonna just say like, we, you know, the two things, if we wanted to move forward with that this summer, checking with Acadia to see if we can extend the usage and for how long. But we can either keep it the way it is now, which would be at no cost, or we could put an investment in with approval of Acadia for the 80 to 100 to improve it incrementally. And so that's why staff came in with the recommendation, like, is it worth that investment, given all the other things that are happening? So that's a decision council has to make and give us direction on. Doesn't have to be today, and, you know, we can bring back, you know, another discussion with you at a future version, but we just wanted to flag that because up until now, and there still is a $300,000 allotment for a pickleball facility sitting in year one. So some direction is going to be required at some point.
Councillor Ingham?
I would not be prepared to make a decision for the 80 to $100,000, not knowing what Acadia is for 1 year. And then Acadia decides to do something, that's a lot of money. So I wouldn't need to know the time frame from Acadia before I was comfortable to make a decision on that investment.
Councillor McKay?
We have town and gown on Monday. I'm not sure if this is on the agenda or not,
Your first day.
but maybe.
You'll be on the other side of the
Aaron's
table.
not be prepared to. But maybe we can bring it up and say, can we have some sort of, you know, discussion about it moving forward? And even if we could get it through this first year, with maybe no investment and still have the commitment from the school. And we said, this is the plan for this just 1 year until we can come to a really solid agreement with Acadia, should there be one, or really need to think of something else, but as long as the messaging is clear to them, because we've been saying this for, I don't know how many years now, 3, that we were gonna put in pickleball, that as long as we gave them options and gave them clear plans of where they would play this year, I think it would be okay. That's a feeling. I don't know that for sure.
Councillor Butler?
I just have a question. I don't know if it's even something that can be pulled together and answered, but I'm assuming the folks that want to play pickleball in Wolfville are already playing pickleball elsewhere. Is that a clear assumption? Or are they just waiting for Wolfville to get a pickleball facility? Because there's pickleball in Kentville, there's pickleball in New Minas, there's going to be there's already pickleball in Hansport, but they're now getting a brand new pickleball court. So there is pickleball elsewhere, and I just keep thinking if it's now going to be in Wolfville, those folks will now, we don't want them to travel to New Minas, but they have been. So what is going to happen to the pickleball in New Minas? Is there going to be enough people there, or is that now going to be obsolete? Are we pulling business from other places, or they're obviously, the folks are going somewhere now. I was wondering if it's possible to pull some of those little things together.
I don't have data there on that, but I would say that all of the pickleball facilities are busy as can be. And so more space would be better. I would say Wolfville folks are playing here and probably going elsewhere for different times. And it's a very social sport. So you know, wherever your friends are that are playing, that's where you're going to meet up with them and play doubles with different groups of people and things like that. So that'd be my response to that.
For someone who has tried to register for a pickleball class, I am telling you, it is. Log on and be ready. And I'll tell you what, I didn't get into any. I mean, it is like, hit the button, like, is it not, it's like booking a tea time when you get it's full. You cannot, it's worse, yeah.
Yeah.
It is unbelievable. And on Sunday mornings, I have it at Wolfville School there, and all of the courts are full, a double, and all of the benches are all full. It's unbelievable. It's wonderful, but it's almost unbelievable. It is.
Not just for your
And young-
grandmother anymore.
No, I was saying even young folk like me are joining.
And even younger, even younger. There's a pro tournament I was just reading about.
Yeah,
Did
I
we-
just want to underscore after that, to me, that says even more that we're not ready. And there's a lot of questions, and we need to get to a better place of readiness if we're going to tell the community that we're spending hundreds of thousands of dollars on a facility. We have to do that. We have to we've been talking about this for how many years now, and we haven't delivered. So I think let's be realistic and deliver something that's really great.
On Monday, we can try and, we'll certainly put it on the agenda and try and see where Acadia is on that in terms of, might it be 3 years? Would that make a difference? If we could, would 80 to 100 for 3 years? So we could get some information and bring that back.
We can't have our CAO make these decisions here.
Well, that too.
Okay, no.
That
I had
too.
to do that.
Sure, she will have some influence.
I'll keep plowing through this next section. We okay? Okay, so I just want to give an
If I
update.
could just.
Oh, yeah.
Just conferring with Erin on her last council meeting. We have a number of in cameras and it's almost 2:45 now. I don't know how much more we have to get through and I think we should still have the discussion that we had started to have before we broke for lunch in terms of direction from this council to staff in terms of when they're working ahead on version 2. Where do we feel comfortable in terms of tax rate and staying within COLA and the 2.2% and all of those things? Not to necessarily talk about individual projects, but just to have our comfort level so staff have some guidance for version 2. So with that in mind, and we've got about an hour and a quarter or an hour and a half left. How long will you need, Erin, for your in cameras?
I'm not sure, but I want to just say an hour because I have
Okay.
quite a bit of things to cover. And this is my last meeting, so I just wanted to.
Okay. Still tomorrow.
I don't think it's Devin that's holding us up. I think it's us.
That was really good discussion. Yeah, I appreciate that. So I'll just quickly tell you what I would have said. So the AT network, we had a working group meeting last night and people know about that. We're moving forward with getting tender packages for projects. And we're also going to bring back to you a wayfinding budget multi-year that is not just for parks, trails, roads, street blades. We're looking at the whole scope. But we're also looking at this kind of language around the AT network. We had a long discussion, over 2 hours around some of these details last night. Really helpful to have that working group. That's it.
Thank you.
So I know we're going to go back to Mike in a couple takeaways, but there was some discussion about having a motion to move forward with tendering for the ones I noted were the tennis courts, Reservoir Park, and the Clock Park and Post Office accessibility pieces. I don't know if that captures everything, but if that's something that's acceptable to council, a motion to that effect would allow us to move forward.
Yep. I would like to move that staff move forward with tendering the following projects: the tennis courts, Reservoir Parks, washrooms, trees and shading, Clock Park accessibility, and post office accessibility as listed in the budgeted items. Something along that line.
That's a good time. As your threshold.
All right, we have
that fair
a
enough?
mover, a seconder, please. Councillor Butler, is there any discussion, questions of council, from council? All those in favor, please indicate by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, so that motion is passed. Okay, Mike, you have a few more.
Okay, and those items you just discussed are actually highlighted in the CIP, so they're easy reference if you want to go back. I was gonna give Devin page references as you were doing it so that we'd link the exciting graphics to the mundane dollars.
I do think that this was good discussion, and I think bringing the visuals is really helpful because I think it's actually probably more helpful than the project charters and the way we've written them more descriptively, because it allows kind of for that discussion around what it will look like. So thank you for that. There's some good takeaways.
What I was gonna do at this point was literally to open the capital budget, to just scan through it to see if everybody was okay. If we run through that quickly, then you then instantly get to your discussion on the various items. And I think we could very quickly come up with a list of, is everybody okay with adding 1 1/4 cents back? Using op reserves for the election, that sort of thing. Is that fair?
Yes, and Would you have in your head the list of those questions we should ask ourselves?
Pretty
Because
much,
those are two.
pretty much the shopping list has
Okay,
been
good.
churning
good.
in my head.
You can help us with that.
And if I miss one, clearly
Someone will
we'll
come up with it.
jump at that. Okay, so if I do this right. I'm using the Excel version, so I can't do the direct page reference. Excel, I can freeze titles and stuff, so that makes it a bit easier. And we're not gonna cover the whole 10 years, we're just gonna run down. I'm on water now. We want the town. There's IT infrastructure. I think we talked about that in November. We're building those dollars back. They're much larger, but they are to deal with real issues around infrastructure, cybersecurity, and just as the network grows, needed items. Just for clarity for the council and community, right now, your town hall library complex, between design, dollars, construction, a little bit in the following year to pick up if needed, there's 9.9 million or $9.95 million in your budget right now that you have funding for, in theory. With a little bit being contributed by the County of Kings towards the library and fundraising by the Friends of the Library. So there's some assumptions in there. But that's your dollar threshold that you're dealing with. Public Works, these are projects that I think have been covered, and you're not going to get any extra detail today, but needed work down at the yard to continue to improve the building both inside and out.
On that one, quickly. So is that carry forward still only just in the budget because it's not finished yet, or do we have to move that one forward? Because that's been a couple of years.
That portion of it, the interior was finished, so it was in this year, simply didn't get to it, so it's largely carried forward.
Okay.
Part of it was waiting for engineering design on the air exchange unit that wouldn't be needed. So carried forward from basically logistic reasons. The replacement of the Welcome Center. I think I got the correct adjusted value, so that's now in there at the adjusted value. So all things being equal, that one should be okay. Fire hall, that's where we said year one design into construction. As you move forward in the year, you'll find out more or less whether those numbers are good. Not in that 3 years, but don't lose sight of it, is once the library moves, you have a heritage building that's some sort of use, and there's lots of good ideas on what that could be, whether it be through the town or privately, but that'll be somewhere in the future. The fire trucks, just to revisit how expensive it is now, and this actually, my discussion with the resident earlier was, you know, why do you need so much money in capital? And we said 2/3 of the new money was going over there. You know, one pumper tanker is $2 million sort of thing. So these are the sorts of things. And this one will ultimately probably move further into the future. Oh, sorry, the ladder truck, because by the time we get it, if it takes 3 years for it to arrive, it could be further out into the future. So your $1.7 million truck there is the one that you already approved. That takes 2 or 3 years to build and bring in. Public Works and Parks, as well as some other fleet and equipment. That's the part where I think the first 3 years are relatively good numbers. Alex has got to a lot of them, but that should be revisited before the final budget to make sure years 4 and out have been adjusted, because otherwise you're not allowing yourself enough room to buy those. We use reserves. So just be aware of that. And that's a replacement program where, yes, I've worked for councils not here, but in the past where they say, let's just put off that vehicle and put off that vehicle. You're going to pay in the end because A, the equipment's needed, and repairs and maintenance go up, and eventually you're actually losing dollars. So that's all the equipment section, which covers any number of areas. An item for discussion as you move forward is when the bylaw car gets turned in, building fire inspection, do they need a vehicle? There's been a lot of discussion at management of, do we have a growing need for vehicles? So I think some of that will come back. So those line items are there just to prompt conversation. Streets, this is where I would suggest, if there's an opening, and it would take a fairly big opening, if everybody recalls, we ended up, we've got streets basically on hold till after the town hall, library, fire hall wastewater treatment plant. Then we have a street in year 4, a street in year 5, and then it goes to every other year. But that was strictly because to have $2 or $3 million a year, every year, there just simply wasn't room. So decision point would be if council wants to bring that into $2 or $3 million a street every year, you gotta find some funding somewhere and or another project would have to give. But the sooner there's room to bring them forward, I think the better off the town is. But that was a key change this year is we've had to basically abandon doing something every year, every second year. So don't lose sight of that. Maple Avenue is just in there highlighted because it's not in the plan yet, and that will follow to the East End secondary development and how that all goes. There's items here for land acquisition if and when they became needed, you know, like Ridge Road, if that was needed for the fire hall sort of thing. Rail trail, Ridge Road probably may or may not be applicable, but again, food for thought, keep it on your radar. Flood risk mitigation, out in year 4 at $1 million, that's likely gonna go up, so again, more pressure that you'll need to find dollars for. Traffic, a lot of this is the safety AT network that Devin just went through, so you get to see how the dollars are allocated right now over 3 years. This comes into his slide that talks about now, okay, let's identify all the elements. The dollars are there. I'll highlight the intersection safety. Again, that was the study that needs to happen, and then that out of that will fall a recommendation as to what needs to happen at Main and Gasboro. The sooner that's ready for you in the new fiscal year, I think the happier everybody will be. Stormwater management is a focus of Public Works in the next couple of years because there are issues they're trying to resolve. That's another reason why we're not quite doing surface streets. We need some dollars in the stormwater system. There's your $5 million project, sewer treatment plant that has the deadline and the 73% funding. So that's a given that it has to happen. Lift stations, there's a need to get onto a replacement program and upgrade, so it has those dollars. SCADA systems are related to all this, so that ties in as well. Then the next section, which we've always called community infrastructure, I'm not sure if we're the only ones that do that, but it kind of fits with the terminology that Devin's bringing forward. So the community amenities, you have the West End that was talked about. Right now, there's $100,000 to start to define that park. Obviously, the park's master plan and further amenities will drive that number, but it may be future years, depends on what can fit. But that 100,000, this you just gave the go ahead to Reservoir Park. Those are the items carried forward. Clock Park, same thing. That's that concrete walkway. Resurface the tennis courts, same thing to start moving because they were carry forwards. This is that pocket that I said may not be enough dollars in the future, $200,000 a year. There's a need to start building some capacity there, or it'll be a project every 3 years, every 4 years. Pickleball, clearly from the discussion, that just sat there pending what the resolution is. So that likely falls off the map. That's not going to save your capital budget or anything. So that just changes the funding scenario. And I doubt if you could even see the line move when that change gets made. So that can get cleaned up. Pretty much everything else is out in future years. I think the walkways that Devin highlighted, we had currently in year 2. We didn't have them in year 1 yet. So that may depend on how you can, that's the concrete walkways at around Mona Parsons statue, as well as the Alex Colville wall. So some of those items, if that could move forward, that would be good. If it can't, I think year 2 is still palatable to get the work done. That was very quickly the first couple of years of your 10-year plan. You know, year 1's $10.1 million. So it's not a small feat to get to this. So if there was anything anybody thought was missing from that, we can bring it up, and otherwise we can jump to the other discussion.
Any capital projects that anyone sees missing in the first year or two? No? Okay. Counselor McKay?
Just a couple of questions and not to belabor them for now, but just to flag them. We keep talking about cars, and I'm curious if we can start looking at e-bikes instead of cars for people who work in town. Because we've been talking, we're gonna have an active transportation thing. If we're gonna, we should maybe practice what we preach, but if they're appropriate, could we look at those things, for people around town?
We've started that conversation at management. We have a couple e-bikes on hand.
Go- I've never
The
seen one.
compliance staff have used them.
Good.
They're actually pretty good for when they're going up to, say, Reservoir Park to go through
Yeah.
the park.
Yeah.
Discussions on further use, I think is still to evolve.
Okay.
But I think that fits everything. When we have a staff lunch, the council's been at some gathering up at the park.
Yeah.
People should walk up.
Mm.
I've noticed that usually when we have a gathering, we have vehicles parked
Yep.
everywhere. Start living the message that you're trying to sell.
That's what I'm saying. I would assume we'll look at a fleet from the fire department. Should we find a new location? I'm assuming that will just be evaluated as we move. A fleet, yeah, the fire department fleet.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
part of the
certainly
scope of the
subject to change.
transition.
yeah, that's, yeah, of course.
absolutely.
That's what I was just making sure. There was work said that we're gonna be doing to the water infrastructure, because we know we have issues. It's just flagging that, because I know I've been reached out by a couple of residents that when we have issues and it affects their property, what our plan is going forward for some of those. I think you dealt with
Oh,
one in particular,
notification that there's work coming up or the outfall of.
us not fixing or
Some of
whatever.
that,
else, that's
okay,
who-
some of
whatever
that
the
is in the
reason.
stormwater.
Yeah.
That's that
Yeah.
attention to it in year 1 and 2,
Mhm.
is to start to address some of the stormwater issues, which I think have turned into claims or potential claims
That's-
against the town.
I would like to see, when we see visuals, you know how we have our CPI for sidewalks, or pavement index for sidewalks and for roads? Can we get one that says where our stop signs, traffic calming and all that kind of stuff is from a visual perspective?
There's
Just, you know, that-
work
what
kind
I
of
mean?
started on that, and it's a matter of which data points get into the GIS.
Yeah.
And so.
But I
that
think that would be
started-
an interesting thing, because I get a lot of, oh, you put stuff here and then it's pushed it to my street or whatever else. So I think that would be an interesting visual and maybe discussion to move forward. We did not talk about the compost site, not saying we have to at this moment in time, but that was something I flagged.
So there is going to be a report coming back for decision point from council. Alex is working on that now. It was going to be in January. Clearly that didn't happen. So February, March at the latest, it will be coming back to council.
That's it, thanks.
Okay.
So we just can continue that then, Aaron? That's after we approve the budget then.
The goal is to have that to you before the budget's approved. Just given like the change in staff and when meetings are happening, it's where does it best fit in the discussion, but Alex has been working on it, so it will come forward to council as part of that.
And I had missed that in my earlier slide, so that's a good one to highlight.
Okay, just before we go in camera, Mike, you said you kind of had it in your head, so if you if you can help us through that, I would appreciate it.
Okay, the first one I'd bring up is if council's open to the idea of adding 1 1/4 cents back to that adjusted rate I gave you. And that 1 1/4 cents will generate about $80,000 to $90,000, brings your shortfall down. And still keeps the overall increase to the taxpayer within inflation.
Inflation.
So if there's general agreement, that can be worked into the next.
What are your thoughts, council? So this is an increase from the decrease because it
Yeah,
was
it's still a lower rate, but yes.
1.475, now it's
2.5.
1.225.
2.2.
And then we'd put it back.
It's about a
up to-
1 cent drop
So a 1 cent, it would,
overall.
from last year, it would,
So what would, it goes it goes from 1.475 and you're dropping it.
I had dropped it in version 1 by 2.2.
Yes,
cents.
2.2, yeah.
Now we're saying let's add back 1 1/4,
Okay.
and that's to help soften what is a large shortfall and still keeps that increase to the taxpayer within inflation.
And it
So what
would
would the
have-
tax, what would the tax rate be then? 1 point?
Whoever added the numbers together.
What- Jody, what was the new tax rate? You've got the numbers in your head.
1 point.
That could be shown in the next iteration. It's,
Yeah.
it's less than the current one.
I think we have 1.4530.
So
As the-
less than the current one.
So it's less.
Or
than
that
the
was,
first.
yeah, that was gonna be the new one with 2.2 taken off. 1.475 was last year, 1.453 was, I think, this year. So it would be 1.46.
No,
It's
it would be
ish-ish, no.
1, 4, 6,
Mm,
This was supposed to
5.5.
Yeah. That's why I said ish.
1.5.
So it's a little bit of a drop in the current tax rate.
About a cent.
Yeah. okay.
And that'll be clarified when
Yeah.
you see that
Okay.
next
Yeah.
iteration.
Okay.
Are we comfortable with that?
No.
Okay.
My preference would be to just maintain the current rate. Because I think that's what people expect.
Mhm.
And I think the last time we made a decision where we lowered the tax rate, with the following year, we went back.
think-
Unless I'm really
Yeah,
confused.
you're missing a point with, it's because we, because of the, well, not, I'm trying, it's not
Provincial.
Sermguard, no, the
Oh.
Serm, because we are not service exchange, that's the word, all I kept thinking was Sermguard. We no longer have to pay 2.2%, 2.2 cents per hundred went to housing and corrections. The province has taken that off. The taxpayer will still pay it in their province will find a way to get that money. So the discussion has been around the province. It's not fair for municipalities. It doesn't seem fair for municipalities to keep the tax rate the same when we, the taxpayer, still have to pay that money for housing and for corrections through our income tax or corporate tax. So that's why we dropped it 2.2,
Right.
because we don't have to pay out that 2.2.
So what you're saying is we drop it 2.2 and we increase it 1.25.
Yes.
Yeah.
We split the difference.
We split the
basically.
difference. So had that provincial exchange not happened at all, where would we likely be?
We
You'd
would
be
have to
likely at-
add one
Yeah.
and a quarter.
So would be 1.25 or would be adding more? I guess I just,
We would be 1.48, 1.49.
Yeah, you'd be going higher than the current rate. I think, not to get too deep into this, when we talk about last year, and if you can remember, we had a disagreement on what that meant. I'm not saying you didn't have to get to that ultimate and put it back to the previous year's rate. But if you go back 2 years ago when the rate was set, it went down, but that kept the overall cost increase to the taxpayer at inflation. Had you not dropped the rate, you would have had funds that were used for something. I don't know what the project would have been. It would have been embedded in your budget. We would have come forward to last year and you wouldn't have been able to go back to the previous rate. You would have had to go higher than that one because you brought forward these costs. So this is the same sort of thing as the mayor said, you've removed something. It's just a matter of trying to communicate what the base is. At the end of the day, it's an overall decrease in your tax rate. It's about what does that mean to the taxpayer? Taxpayer doesn't pay a tax rate, they pay dollars. So the 1.25 will allow you an inflationary increase. If you leave the rate where it is today, you are increasing taxes more than inflation.
Right.
Okay.
so our overall practice is to always keep the tax rate at rate of inflation, not necessarily at in accordance to what our budget might require us. Is that,
I don't know if there's any regularly, the last few years, the inflation rate has been moving around in a way it hadn't in the recent
Yeah,
past.
I think councils, you're right, it's an annual decision. That's why we talk about it in November. You have provided direction to keep the overall increase in tax bill to within inflation. Last year, we increased taxes by more than inflation. 1.25 cents this year. You put it back to the rate it was 2 years ago, but it increased tax bills by more than inflation. That was one of the decision points. The decision was to go to the rate the year before. This is why it's important. It's, if you want to just talk rate, and if assessments went up 20%, you would say, keep the rate the same. But you've increased taxes 20%. Way more than inflation. That's why I always try to circle back to the impact on the dollar. So if you add 1.25, the impact's inflation. If you leave the rate where it is, the impact will be greater than inflation. Doesn't mean you're not going to end up back up there to balance things.
But last year, what we did was we brought it back up to what it was 3 years ago. right? Because in our second year, this council, we lowered it,
Mhm.
right?
In
And
order
then-
to keep taxes within inflation.
Okay.
You-
I don't know which of you had your light on first.
Do I have my light on?
Oh,
Oh.
sorry.
Uh,
We don't both turned up.
I'm comfortable with that,
With what?
the theory of it going down 2.2, us adding 1.25, keep it within the cost of living increase as a rate discussion at this stage of the game.
At this,
I mean,
at this
stage of the
stage,
game. I
because you may still end up back at
We
the
don't-
current
who
rates.
knows? Yeah.
How do others feel? To give staff direction on that. I'm comfortable with
Is that this set of lines that's getting,
It is, but don't worry, it changes every few minutes.
okay,
So that's what staff can.
election.
That was, I was gonna, oh, thanks, you're going through the.
Election coming out of the
Reserves.
reserves,
Yes,
operating reserves. Yeah.
yes.
Albeit somewhat overdrawn, but smaller. So there's 30.
Yeah.
The boxcars there, it's either don't spend the boxcar dollars and think about what you're doing about with it, or go back to the use of reserves. And I'm not even sure, based on the conversation, people think that's a worthy project for reserves. So you can save 30 by just putting that on hold till you know what it is, which might be a future budget. Or it may be,
there's a staff report.
well, that would be a future
Councillor
budget
Potter?
discussion.
I wouldn't have any problem with kicking that ahead in a couple of years. Cause I mean, a boxcar looks better when it's in a rough state, to be honest.
And what I would say about that is that's probably better than using reserves, because using reserves for something that there's, doesn't seem to be consensus on yet, or even what it is, seems. And if a really good idea comes up and it comes forward for a future budget, it may pass the threshold of that budget.
Councillor Butler?
I'm completely fine with never spending $30,000 on a boxcar, and I love trains. Because a couple lines above that, there was only still 10,000 allotted towards EDI work. Can some of the boxcars scoot up to that?
That was a question I didn't fully answer, I think.
Just good.
Because there was a
Let's-
question.
If
of
we're
what was
putting
in the-
10,000 into EDI and
Can
30,000
you
in
on
a
the
boxcar.
boxcar?
Okay,
Then we'll
yes.
come back to that
All
one.
right, it was just sort of a shift in dollars, but no, I don't think that 30,000 should be spent on a boxcar or allotted for the boxcar until there's a substantial plan
I
in
thought
place.
Councillor Palmer was going to say he'd be happy kicking it down the road, and so would I. like,
Or the rails.
Or the rails or whatever, so yeah, no,
Okay.
maybe, maybe.
Did
We're
we
in
not
that
ask
$140,000 or
staff to explore that?
$150,000 range now.
Pardon?
Did we not ask staff to explore what it would mean to get rid of that, Carla?
I don't know if we did,
Yeah.
but do that too.
That
we-
can
can we
also-
do-
that can happen concurrently so that you're aware of that number if you want to pursue that.
I don't think there's a real love affair with the boxcar right now. It's certainly not in the current time and certainly not for reserves.
Those are the really easy ones. I've got a couple that I think should be looked at to bring back for version 2. Part of it is that street maintenance. Alex said the rationale of why we're under budget, but that number, take this the way it's meant, is a number that we've worked towards. There's no mathematical formula that said that's the right number, because we've seen graphs where I've shown it's much lower. Could you take 10,000 off that or 20,000? it would still be far more than you used to do. So there's a decision point. Yes, we always hear complaints about the roads and the potholes, but generally when you dig into the data, it's those complaints, there's potholes in every town, in every county, in every community. Generally speaking, if we're getting to key areas, is that full amount needed yet? And I'm only saying $10,000 or $20,000. I wouldn't say cut that big, but you may have something there. Have that conversation with Alex to ensure that you're not shortchanging yourself. That could be 10 or 20.
Counselor Palmer?
I think the number was $360,000 or something.
I think 380 is in the current
380.
budget,
Is that tendered work or is that our work?
tendered.
Tendered. I'd be leery about dropping that because tenders are gonna go up. So,
Oh, absolutely. I'm not saying that there's not a shorter distance that would get covered. I'm just saying, where's the balance of, there's only so many dollars to go around.
Counselor?
My only concern on it would be this. I think Alex needs to tell us quite honestly, because when we tender it, he needs to do the work, tender it, supervise it, whatever, all the things that Alex does to make sure it's done right. In Alex's operational work plan, is that number the reasonable number for what he plans on doing for the year? If it's not, tell us what it is. And I think that's the only logical way, because I don't know what his work plan is right off the top. So he needs to tell us whether that is a real number that he can totally work towards this year. If it's not, because he's got water and all the other things that our engineer does, then I think he just needs to be the one to tell us what it is.
And that's
I
why
mean,
I say
kind of
that
different, but
conversation
yeah.
should, I'm saying that's,
Yeah.
don't make that decision now,
No.
but keep it.
Yeah.
2 of the last 3 years have been underspent
Yes, because
by
Alex
a
is overworked.
magnitude.
Okay,
Salt is another one. That dollar amount's been upped to an average, and Alex has got a really good analysis of the quantities and the prices. The current budget takes the assumption that it includes our 2 worst winters 5 years ago, I think. Winters are changing. We've been under budget the last couple of years. I'm not saying there's big dollars there, but there's $5,000 to $10,000 that should be discussed as you move forward. Because the discussion before is, it's good to be buffered. It's not necessarily to be good to be over buffered in areas that you're gonna salt the roads whether you're at the budget amount or not. And if we're not spending it, even with the price escalation, it's slightly too big. I think you've hit the 3 obvious ones that I had. If somebody had something else in their head and I've forgotten it, I'd be open to answering questions on it.
Ooh, no, I don't have anything. I just, when the version 2, are you going to be doing version 2?
No,
Oh, okay, so okay, I just want to throw it out there to whoever's, when we're doing the version 2, in order to keep our tax bill within inflation, because the service exchange is new, can we make sure that that's written in very sort of plain language? Because that's one thing that us as counselors have to explain why the tax rate went up or down. So can we have that, pass that on to make sure that it's going to be an easier explanation?
heck, in this one, you've actually got to, if you didn't get into the details, you could go, the tax rate's lower than it was last.
Well, that's
year.
what I'm saying. I could say that. I could say that, but then we don't know where, people are gonna dive into. So if we can have it for explanation that really well written, then I would appreciate that.
And when I say no, I'm not engaged to go past today. I have to bring something to audit next week. Whether there's a request to help out, depending on where you're at and what I'm doing. But I say no because there's nothing to bring me back after today's meeting right now.
We wanted to get to version 1 done so that the new director and the interim CAO could come in with a really strong starting point, and then it will be
Yeah.
their call as to whether or not they need additional support as they go through the process. But, and like, as Mike mentioned, this was one chunk of work was the budget, but he's also doing support for the audit committee next week with our 3rd quarter variance and year-end forecast as well.
So
Counselor
we have
McKay?
clear direction on 3 items.
Yes,
So that, I can even get that facilitated through the working draft. If I think of other things that we haven't talked about, I can fire them off so that you're aware of at least my thoughts.
Counselor McKay I
Okay.
have one.
I just had a question because there were then some things where we said maybe staff would go back and look at looking at their expenses on that side of things. So I think there was the planning department. So can we get, I was two versions, but what does it look like if we take out the extra staff? Should we get some funding down the road? I don't know what that savings is or if it's not. And are we going to, the housing, I think we discussed having a housing specialist or something and looking at that, even as a cost sharing thing. So are we that's not in,
I would suggest those ones that aren't, like,
Leave that.
clearly we
Okay.
heard interest.
Okay.
Some cost models would have to come back with version 2 with
couldn't remember it was in or
some
not.
scenarios. Is
not.
that a fair way to put it?
It's not in the budget now.
It is not in the
That's-
budget.
Okay, we are going to go in camera, but before we do that, I don't believe we have anybody. Guess we should do public input before we go in camera, but unless we have someone online.
Nope.
And the other thing, because I don't know if Rob is staying with us and well, that's great, but while he's here, can we have a quick chat about the date of the February cow? It's the 6th, I think, is the current date. That's not, I definitely think we need a CAO here, and Rob had a previous commitment on that, and it might also not be, at one time we were talking about bringing more budget discussion, and I'm gathering that we probably won't be ready for that, and that may also
I think
be Beth's first day or second day. So
So Rob has some commitments in person on Mondays and Tuesdays through February in the mornings, teaching the course. So if we could stay away from a Monday or Tuesday, it's probably.
okay. Oh, she's not here till the 16th?
She's starting on the 5th. She's going to be here that week. She's going to take some homework away and then she's going to actually move the following week. So she will be here for that one time window between the 5th and the 5th and the 9th. And then she'll be back in person officially permanently the 19th.
So,
Better?
Yeah,
the 7th of February, which is a Wednesday? I don't know. Well, then,
Worship, if I could help or assist, if I may.
yes,
As an observation, and certainly I'll default to council, but when I hear of the genuine interest in unpacking some of these key considerations, council may decide or could choose, in particular relative to budget deliberations, to have a couple of either half-day or 2-hour sessions on a variety of days, so that by the time we are actually building out version 2, it's a little, we could be a little bit more specific in terms of how it's crafted and focused to make sure it's congruent with council's wishes. I'm just thinking that certainly there's value in having a full day meeting with the committee of the whole. However, looking forward and being mindful of a new director arriving and providing, and I have no doubt to be looking to Mike for further support in the weeks to come. And I also took note of the importance of, from a messaging perspective, I think it's imperative that council has key consistent messaging for our citizens, so they have a clear understanding in terms of the deliverables of the budget, the benefits of what's being delivered, and the value of that financial contribution. So there's a variety of considerations, but certainly for the purposes of today, in terms of setting aside a date, as I had indicated to Aaron prior to the opportunity to come and work with the town, I had made a commitment to Dalhousie University relative to teaching a course in February, and it happens to be on the Monday, Tuesday mornings, with me working virtually in the afternoons. However, I welcome I will do my best to massage the schedule to make sure that we can accommodate council's interest. But I did want to suggest that if council is amenable to it, there could be some value to having a couple of either half day or even 2.5-hour sessions, morning or afternoon, at council's wishes, to, if you want more time, to be able to do the deeper dive on the budget so as to better inform version 2. I just wanted to put that out there. So thank you, Your Worship.
thank you. Aaron just suggested we will cancel the 6th and we will doodle poll some other dates. Some of our counselors have full-time jobs, and so to work around their schedules as well. But for now, we will cancel the 6th And Laura, I guess, will send out one or more doodle polls. So we don't have a date at this point.
It's already canceled.
Okay,
That's efficiency.
well, it needs to be done before council, so unless council is changed, and I guess we need to, so assuming not, then it does need to be done before the 20th. We'll get that out today or tomorrow. You don't have to do it today. We'll get it out tomorrow. You're gonna do it today. She's here a bit the first week of February, and is she?
The new director, yeah, she's here that full week of the 5th. Then she's taken some things to work from home, but she's moving the following week, so she won't be here on site. And then she's back the 19th permanently.
We'll work it out. All right, all
15, it's not gonna work.
right, we'll send out a doodle poll. All right, a motion to go in camera, please. Thank you, Council Promoter. Thank you, Deputy Mayor. All in favor?
Yeah.
That
And
passes.
Everybody